Topic 1. Because men are on average seen as more physically capable than women, they are looked upon as protectors. But do men have a moral duty to step in to defend others? Should a man help a woman who might be in physical danger? What would you think of a man who only watched a woman be attacked and took no action? Is it sexist to assume a woman would want a man's help? Is it sexist that some expect men to put their lives on the line? All right, it's a lot here. So tackle any part you want. We're going universal. We're going to do intros first.
Okay.
No problem. Jack.
So do men have a moral duty to step in and defend others? I would say yes, but no more so than like any person would have a moral duty to step in and defend others in a situation like that. Like, I would hope that whether it was a man or a woman who is witnessing, like, for example, me getting harassed or beaten up, that they would intervene in some way. I don't think just because you happen to have a pair of testicles and you present masculinely, you have a moral duty that is greater than anyone else to like step in and stop awful things from happening. Like, you should do that regardless of what your gender is. So I guess I'm interested to see what other people on the panel think about this. Yeah.
Testicles give you superpowers. I don't know how you don't know this, but okay, moving on. Senpai Chow.
Yeah, I generally agree with what Riverboat Jack has to say, that people just generally have a duty to defend others, and I think an idea that we can use to establish that is through the social contract. It's pretty simple up until we do start adding in that factor of, well, sexuality, because of its implications that men are strong, women are weak, and one need is needed to protect the other. It is sexist. But the thing is that I don't think it's a problem because of this quote, which is about racism, but I think it connects. I think the same applies. Difference cannot be considered an end in and of itself. The real stakes against racism do not concern difference itself, but the use of difference as a weapon against its victims, to the advantage of the victimizer. So they just replace racism with sexism. In the scenario given by the question, the focal point of sexism is that it's the perpetrator, or what causes the woman to be in that physical danger in the first place. That is when difference is used as a weapon.
Okay, thanks so much. Counterpoints.
Yeah, so this is something that I think the reason why we're asking whether or not men have a moral duty to intervene is because we're assuming, on average, a greater capacity to intervene or a greater instinct to intervene. I think testosterone endocrinologically, I think it's just proven to basically up aggression. That doesn't mean that women aren't capable of taking on some of these same roles. But basically, if you boil down the question and like degendered it, and you just said, if you have the capacity to intervene and you don't, is that a moral wrong? And my answer would be yes. Now, maybe on average, men are more able to fulfill that capacity, so they should be pressured just a little bit to consider that more. But at the same time, like, I have no problems with this. As a matter of fact, this would be an aspect of toxic masculinity, or not toxic masculinity, an aspect of positive masculinity that I would seek to preserve. Is that chivalry, the capacity to help others, all that kind of stuff should be a moral ideal that people aspire to and should be held up as positive example. So yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I'll leave it there till we get to the open.
Hans.
Yeah, not trying to retread anything that anyone's already said. I agree with most of what's been put forward by Jack and by Senpai and then even by Connor. I think whether it's a man or woman, I think your responsibility to step in any given situation is directly tied to like how much potential you have to like successfully intervene, right? Like I think it's very like based on context. Like say if I saw one person being attacked by say like a dozen people, right? And I'm one guy. Could I try and help? Probably. Would I do much of like good? Probably not. If I saw like a single person like bullying another person, and I was reasonably capable that I could help handle that situation, then I would do that. And I've done that in the past. Like when I was in college, I was like the like unofficial bouncer for like some of my orgs. Like if there was a party and like someone was being like disorderly or drunk or rowdy, I would ask them to leave if they were like bothering people. And those are things that I'm comfortable with, even though like I don't know how to fight. And so I think it's like it's about knowing what you're capable of and like what your limits are in terms of where you should be stepping in. But if you're reasonably confident that you can like assist in a situation and you don't, then yeah, I think you're kind of either if not cowardly, at least like apathetic. And I really dislike that. I would probably you'd probably lose points in my book as like a good person if you didn't try and help when you had the potential to.
Okay, let's go, Dooby.
Yeah, so I think I mostly agree with just about everything everyone said so far. I don't think this is really a gendered question. It needs to be a gendered question. I think if you have the capacity to help, you probably should. What I'm curious about is like where do we draw that line? So let's say someone has a capacity to help, but they choose not to. Maybe they're just afraid. Right? Maybe they just don't want to get involved. It's not their business. They don't know that person. Why should they put themselves at risk for this person? Right? Even if they have the ability to stop whatever's going on. Is it like, do you guys think it's just like a moral question? You just think they're a bad person, or should we step beyond that and say there should be some kind of legal repercussions for that? And akin to like watching, there was a case a while back where someone watched a child drown, and they could have helped this child, but they didn't, right? And I think they got into trouble for that. I forgot what the law was, and I'm wondering if you'd apply that to like these kind of situations where there's just like a fight going on.
I do need to intervene.
And honestly, I'm sorry, what was that?
I do need to intervene. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, is there like a do? Yeah, exactly. And I'm not really sure where I draw the line myself, so I'm just curious as to what you guys think.
Okay. We after intros, I can like answer that probably a bit. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to RZ or RD Zoid, and I have other places to take this question too. We have some agreement here, but I think we have other places that we might have a lot of disagreement. Go ahead, RD Zoid.
I would say, well, I don't think we should make things moral obligations where people have to enter in and expose themselves to risk. Like I would say that if you were to step in, like if there's a fight or something about to happen, it would make you a good person. But I think it'd be really weird to chastise somebody for not doing it, because I just think it's really weird to expect people to expose themselves to risk. Like, we don't know what the outcome would be. People have died just from like common street fights before. So it's like, to expect someone to do that, I just think is you're kind of heading down like a really kind of dangerous path as in terms of like determining what morals or what ethics you want to use. In terms of like whether it's sexist for a woman to want a man's help, it's like out of all the choices.
No, actually, continue. Never mind.
Well, I would just say it probably. Well, I guess if you were to expect something from just a certain like sex, so like just assume all men or assume all women, it's probably based out of a position that's sexist. But I kind of get why you would think that, because like what other choice would she have besides just defending herself? Like a man would probably, if it's against another man, then a man would probably have a better shot. But I would say it probably would come from a place that's sexist, but I don't really think that's that big of a deal.
Okay. Universal discourse.
Yeah, I think just to break down your question, some people assume they're more physically capable. They're not all physically capable, and they're looked on as protectors. Nobody should be ascribed that role just because of a trait. So that's not. You should not just say that's a man, or oh, that person's in the gym, they're super strong. They're going to be the protector. Don't assign a role to people they didn't choose. Do men have a moral duty to step in? No, they don't. Should a man help a woman who might be in physical danger if he can? Because his better choice, if somebody assailant has a gun, would be obviously to call for help, unless he thinks he can tackle him and get away with it. If a man only watched a woman be attacked and took no action, okay, maybe he couldn't take action. I mean, unless he was getting off watching it, I wouldn't blame somebody for that. I've had to do defense and first response. So no, people who can't handle it, they're not trained or they're not capable, as everyone says, shouldn't take action. It's too dangerous. You should be on standby, call for help always. Is it sexist to assume a woman would want a man's help? Not really. Men often need women's help doing things that they assume only women do. I don't quite consider that sexist. Insisting that a woman be helped when she doesn't need help, I think that's sexist. To expect men to put their lives on the line just because they're men, completely sexist. So that's my whole take.
Okay, thanks so much. All right. Kevin FM, round us out.
All right. So just looking at the premise of the question here, the first thing that came to my mind is pretty much, do men have a duty to help women specifically? And that's based on gendered expectations that have been baked into American society and society in general since the beginning of the country. And I just think that in terms of whether a man specifically should be morally obligated to help a woman who's in danger, no. Because I will tell you right now, unlike that beautiful man Hans over there, I have weak noodly arms, so I couldn't do a thing to help anyone anyway. But when it comes to something like, if there's a moral responsibility for people to try and help each other out if they're in danger, absolutely. There's absolutely an obligation. Now, there's of course a separate question that we may or may not need to address in terms of the legal obligations for helping people, but I don't think that's what's being discussed here. I think that if I understand the prompt correctly, this is more just in the moral grounds.
Well, we can take it anywhere. I don't care as long as we have a good conversation. Yeah. So we seem to have a lot of agreement there. On.
I want to dig into something that both like Dooby and Universal Discourse was talking about.
Okay.
For discourse, I think what you were getting at is the difference between, say, like should do something versus ought to do something, and like the concept of moral obligation. And I completely agree that that you should probably do something, but like I wouldn't hold it against somebody who say either couldn't or didn't feel safe themselves. And then about like the legal obligation, about like I say like legally liable Dooby, it depends. Like in some states or in some places, I was like a lifeguard, right? And there's say Good Samaritan laws, which means like if someone's like dying or something and you help them, you're not legally liable for like assisting them, right? I think it really goes back to like the question of competence in a given area, depending like how comfortable you are in terms of assessing that situation. And like, obviously that is like contextualized in any thing, right? Like I'm not say I know like basic first aid and I know how to do like CPR stuff because like I was certified for lifeguard stuff. If someone like lost an arm or some shit, I'm not qualified to assist them in any way, shape, or form. And so I'd probably not do something about it. And again, like in the same way with like say a physical fight, I feel very confident in my ability to like pull two guys apart at a party. I've done that multiple times. But like would I say like try and stop like a gang of like 6 people like beating a guy in an alley? I probably wouldn't be able to do much, even if I did try to help. So I'd probably just try and call the police. So
real quick, because you said should and ought, can you like describe what the differences between those mean exactly? Because from my understanding, those basically mean the same thing.
Okay, so like ought, it's like it's a difference between like objective versus prescriptive. So should is like something is like when I say something like is objectively good, it means like it's just like a good thing to do, right? Like this is like a good value that you're supposed to do. Something that's prescriptive implies that like it drives you to take action for something. So when I say that like it's a good thing, so like helping someone else is objectively a good thing, or at least like unless someone wants to do like some like big brain like logic lord thing at me, that's what I would say. Like helping someone is a good thing. But like say, are you like required to, especially in situations where you're not like either capable of rendering like effective help, or just or there might be like great danger to yourself? I can't like force someone else to do that, if that makes sense.
Go
So
ahead.
it's like
let me
They
give you.
still sound the ssame.
it's like okay, so like the difference is like the difference between like say should versus like okay should versus ought. It's like that's just it's like a philosophical thing. But like okay, so
Is it supererogatory, Hans? Is it supererogatory, as our buddy Vosh would say?
I don't like know what you're talking about. Like, but okay, so I guess the difference, right? If we're trying to like ground this more like in like say like a legal sense, I would say if someone knows CPR, right, and someone's dying in front of them, you should probably try and help them. But if you don't, I don't think you should say like go to prison, if that makes sense, for not helping. That's the difference that I'm talking about. In that, like, I think when you have the capacity to help, you should, but there isn't, say, like a legal, like, you ought to help this person or else prison time or else like a fine or something. I don't think that's a way to like to help structure society. And I think
Let me give you an example, just to make this like more clear. I guess I'm just trying to understand your thinking here. So let's say I'm walking to work, right, and I hear a woman screaming from an alley, right, help me, and she's probably being raped behind a dumpster or something, right? And rather than call the police or scream stop or rush over to help her, I hear the screams and I'm like, all right, I'm out, and I walk to work and do nothing, right? If it's found later, right, that they see like on a video camera or something that I did that, do you think that I should be held like criminally responsible for whatever happened to this woman, or for like I don't know, not for what happened to her, right? But there should be some kind of penalty for me not taking some kind of action.
Well, isn't that the same as hit and run?
No,
because you're not participating.
Hey,
I think I could help with this. Just jumping in here. So based on how, for example, laws and statutes are constructed, the legislature either uses you may do something or you shall do something. So if you shall do something in a statute, you have an absolute duty to do that. Whereas if you have a permissive may, then you're not necessarily required to do it, but it's something that the statute is asking that you could do. So in a situation with the alleyway and the dumpster, you don't know what's going on in that situation. And, even if it sounds fucked up from a moral perspective, if you decide to do nothing about that, then morally you may be responsible, but you may also be putting yourself in more danger than you thought you would have been originally. So I think that's where Hans was going with that, I think.
Well, also, it's not the line doesn't stop at the line doesn't stop at you directly intervening too. Like you have options that go up to that line. Like you could call the cops or something, or be like, "Hey, I have a gun." If you don't, I don't know, something like it's not just like one. It's not an absolute like a binary choice.
So I'm going to.
Do you understand this difference between should and ought? That wasn't clear.
Well, based on my understanding, those should and ought are interchangeable terms.
Okay, all right. So you don't actually understand. Okay, let me give you.
I think it'd be easier if you just use must instead of
like an example that
must.
I'm gonna take a shot. I'm not gonna give you an example. People have already given you examples.
Senpai Chow, how about ought versus must? It might be a bit more clearer.
That's good.
Yeah.
That is a lot better. I was just gonna go with responsibility. Okay, are you responsible to do something? Is a lot different from is it good for you to do something? Am I responsible to hold the door for everybody who wants to come into like my house? Like, no, not really. I don't have to do that, but is it like something that I could do and it's like really nice for me to do it? Like, hell yeah. I'm not gonna get punished for not doing it. It's not a responsibility. It's not something that you're gonna get punished for. But then the whole premise of this topic is we're going away from responsibility and we're thinking about moral duty. And that's more in the realm of what is the good thing to do? What is the best thing to do?
So
yeah.
I want to let in.
I need clarification, please. Like, it's just like a definitional thing. All right. So like, just like to help clarify like the definitions for RD. It's not must and ought. It should or must if you are going to use that. Like if I should do something, I should do it, but I'm not required to. If you must do something, you have to do it. That's what we're talking about. Like in terms of like being legally liable.
Suggestion versus requirement.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Exactly.
All right, great. So let's go to counterpoints, and then
Yeah, so basically, serving in law enforcement and serving alongside first responders, oftentimes one of our biggest limits is capacity. Where can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can.
So law enforcement, I worked in a city of 15,000. We had 5 people on patrol per day. So literally one person per 1,000. And sometimes things would break bad and we wouldn't have the ability to respond to every single bad thing that was happening. Same thing with firefighters, EMTs. Sometimes there's enough medical emergencies that they're overwhelmed and logistically they can't keep up with it. One of the things that I was toying with in my head was basically having voluntary education, and maybe at the high school level, maybe at the middle school level, as far as like first aid, self-defense, like those kinds of things, situational awareness, all of that jazz. And the reason why I bring that up is because particularly when it comes to my first aid training, a lot of my first aid training is very rudimentary. It's as simple as packing a wound, doing a tourniquet, chest compressions, like they're teaching no breath CPR right now. So these are things that most people with arms, legs, and a brain can do. And if you were to make that like a voluntary education, you're now building the pool of people who are capable of intervening during emergency situations. And so that would be something that like I would want if I was king for a day, if I was dictator for a day, I would absolutely want people to be educated in the rudimentaries of self-defense, situational awareness, and first aid at least on a voluntary basis.
All right, let's go with Riverboat Jack.
So if we're going to be in this territory of like, should there be legal consequences if you just stand by and do nothing?
Mhm.
Well, then that gets us into some really tricky water when it comes to policing, doesn't it? I mean, you can look at the case of George Floyd. There were tons of people standing around while he got, choked to death in front of everybody. So does that mean that the people who stood by and did nothing are legally accountable for his death? I think this
Well,
quickly gets us into some really tricky water, just
um,
legally.
there are when I said hit and run, I was talking about some state laws have it where, especially on the highway, if you witnessed a crime, an accident, something or other, you did not report it, you actually could be held legally accountable.
Mhm.
And I'm not clear which states do that, but I know of cases where I actually had to go and help advocate for somebody who was brought up because they didn't report, a fatal accident. They just kept driving. But in the case of George Floyd, the police were already there, not being considered, even though it was a crime what he did,
Mhm.
but they were there so they wouldn't consider it a crime. Therefore, bystanders wouldn't have been legally obligated to do anything in that case. You know,
Well, I think that at
I
least you.
think. Well,
Sorry.
sorry, just really quickly, I was just thinking that like people, if we're talking specifically about when George Floyd was being leaned upon, and there were people who
killed. Why don't you
were,
just call it killed?
all right, we can go with
Please.
killed. I don't
Murdered.
care.
He was
Just
All right,
murdered.
fine,
Thank you.
fine.
Appreciate it.
A knee on his neck. I'm not trying to fucking whitewash it. I don't give a shit. I'll use more abrasive language than all y'all.
Yay!
So,
Good.
but the point being that we were talking about like capacity and capacity having a spectrum. I don't think we're trying to legally or morally require people to literally like, tackle fucking cops. And on top of that, I think a lot of the people who were there acted within their moral capacity. They criticized, they screamed, they yelled, they cried.
Really did.
The EMT tried to intervene, literally like, telling the cop, like, I'm a fucking EMT. This person's in medical distress. Please let me assist. I think the FD after they fire department after they showed up, I think they had similar conversations about like what the fuck did y'all do? And then obviously after event, this person lost his life, but they all testified against the criminally culpable person to hold them responsible for their actions. So I think this falls in the line of capacity and
Mhm.
moral action being gauged together.
Yeah.
So
I think
Well, the only reason I brought this up was because Doobie was asking about should there be a legal ramifications for people who don't step in and do everything in their power to help somebody, and regardless if that person is being murdered by or assaulted by a street thug versus a cop, it seems to me like either way, you would have a moral duty to intervene to stop that murder from occurring.
What about
This is weird.
I don't know about that.
Wait. I would definitely like Jack. I would definitely say like in the case of like Floyd or like a police officer killing somebody or anyone with a gun. Like if I know, like I'm not bulletproof, right? Like I'm a big guy. I'm not bulletproof. The people that I've like physically handled, I was very aware whether or not they were like packing weapons, right?
Yeah.
Because at most college parties, people don't bring guns and shit. But like, would I say like I'd be much more like if I saw like armed people like abusing somebody, I would probably be much less comfortable trying to physically stop them. And I think like Connor,
Well, again,
brings,
but to Dooby's point, should you have a legal obligation to try and stop them?
No, and I think universal discourse brings up a really good point about like the level of responsibility people have. So the level of responsibility for like the hit and run thing was reporting it. It wasn't stopping it. And I think as a society, we've kind of decided that like asking one of those things might be permissible. And I'd like to see like where everyone kind of stands on like the idea of like reporting versus intervening, because I don't think you have like a legal responsibility to intervene because that's like a lot of harm for somebody. But I think you might have like a legal like obligation to report a crime that's happening, right?
Well, does reporting that
100%.
count as intervening?
All right.
Is that not intervention?
Okay. When I say intervening, I mean like trying to physically stop a situation. It's a difference between me like reporting a murder to the police and me like watching a person getting murdered and stabbed or like shot, and I have to like, I would probably say I'm required to call the cops. I would probably not say I'm required to like run in and try and like United States of Smash like whoever's like doing the murdering. It's like I would hope that I would, right? Like because like there was like
I mean, you certainly have the muscles for it, Hans.
Don't inflate him. Don't inflate him, please.
What's like okay, here's like here's like actually a situation that happened, right? So like in my apartment complex, it was late at night. I heard some like screaming like a man and woman across the hall, like outside my door, and it was me and my roommate, and we're both like pretty big burly guys. And we look through like our peephole, and we see a man in his underwear with no visible weapons and a woman like in some sort of a scuffle, right? And we decided that we were gonna like run out and like try and like stop whatever was happening. And we did that, and like it turns out like the man was like trying to like he was not well mentally, and so she was actually trying to restrain him. And so we like helped restrain him until like the cops got there like 2 minutes later. And so it's totally normal. Like we assess the situation. We're like, all right, it's us and like it's two big guys versus like we look to be a smaller guy and a woman like having an alteration. There was no like visible weapons, and we made that choice. Like if there was if that guy like had a gun, then we probably might not have done that, right? So it very much depends. And I don't think it makes you cowardly for trying to assess like whether or not you should jump in.
So,
but if you think you have a shot, you should try.
For sure. All right, we're
Do
gonna.
you think it would be cowardly to not do anything?
Hold on, sorry. We're gonna let some other people in. So we're gonna go to Connor, Jack, and then Universal. I do have a multiple ways to complicate the situation. So, but I'll give you guys a try first. Go ahead.
Yay! More complications.
Yay!
Yeah. So
Yay!
so this would be interesting to me, Jack, because when I heard what you said, now I could be misinterpreting what you were saying. But for instance, like there are times when law enforcement can intervene with lethal force and are perfectly justified in doing so. If that person is armed, if they just committed a forcible felony and all that kind of stuff, if they're in a fight, and sometimes these fights are dangerous. Sometimes, a cop is basically swinging at somebody with a baton, they're pepper spraying them, they're tasing them, like all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of horrific violence when you're trying to basically effect an arrest. So when you brought up that, like, do people have like a moral duty to intervene against law enforcement when they're about to, I think you used the term murder. I like my curiosity about that point is like, do you mean that the bystanders know that this is like excessive force, abuse of power, murder? Or do you mean when a law enforcement officer is committing homicide that may or may not be in the line of duty and it's difficult to understand the variables? Which one did you mean?
So I was bringing up this point to kind of point out that a legal duty to intervene would get very, very messy very quickly. For at least one of the reasons that you're talking about right here. You don't know the full details of what's happening in any given law enforcement interaction. If you're a bystander who happens to be walking by and you have incomplete knowledge of the event, stuff like that. So it could very quickly spiral to the point where you would just have legal justification to kill cops. If
Okay.
you believe that they might be, committing a murder.
I don't think. I'm sorry. Jack,
That's
go
what it seemed.
No.
That's what it seemed like could be the ramifications of what Dooby was talking about. If
I
you're
don't
applying
think
it
that
to
it makes any
everyone
sense.
as opposed to just like street thugs.
Well, I don't think there's a reason to apply it to the cops, right? Because
Why?
the cops, are
a cop just got
presumably,
convicted for murder.
well, while he was murdering George Floyd, he was acting with a full force of like the state behind him, right? So yeah, it turned out what he did was wrong, but while he was doing this, he was still a cop, right? With the badge and everything that means behind it.
Well, that doesn't
So
mean
I don't think
to murder people.
Well, I don't. That's not what I'm saying.
There is a
so
limit to
Yeah,
the
but
use of
hold on.
he's saying-
force.
I understand.
That's why
I
it's in
understand.
jail.
So exactly. So I think that in the course of their duty, if they're fucking up, if they're doing things they shouldn't do, there are ways to report that and deal with that. I don't think
Should
that
you
you
let
need
cops
to.
murder people.
Holy
I don't know. That's a difficult
Like
question.
if you have
Because
say
like
you have
Connor
a
said
dirty
earlier, you
cop,
don't always
should
know. You don't always know the full context of the situation of what's
exactly.
going on. Now there are situations where
You can apply that
this
to
had
all
nothing to
other
do.
situations.
Yeah,
too.
but I don't think we
No.
need to. I don't think we need to.
It was brought up
I
before.
Okay.
I think if we're
So-
speaking, please, I think if we're speaking about like a citizen's duty to intervene, right? We can assume that just in speaking about that topic specifically, that if there's a cop involved, they're acting with the force of the state behind them. They have like some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not
Authority?
duty. Authority. There we go.
Okay.
Authority. They've got the
Agency.
authority of the state behind them, and whatever actions they're taking. If there's a problem with the actions, you should report them, call their supervisor, whatever the fuck you want to do. But while they're doing these things, it's probably a bad idea to get involved if you don't know what the fuck's going on.
Okay.
But it was also
that's
real quick.
You're the one who's suggesting there should be legal impetus for people to intervene.
He asked. I don't think he said.
asked. He didn't advocate for it.
Well, and that I'm just trying to point out why it would be a bad idea.
Okay. And it would be a bad idea, but also what you bring up is an extreme of whatever implication
obviously.
in application to the law. And we all know that the law is a lot more complicated than just take some one sentence generalization and apply it to everything. Of course, that's not going to be a law. It'll never be a law. But there are cases, as given by UD, and I learned about this a couple of months ago, of a person who was in a robbery but didn't know they were in a robbery, but at some point found out that they were in a robbery, but then were held liable because they had the ability to intervene and prevent. There are some cases like that, and there are other cases in which, well, there's not really much responsibility. But I want to address another point in which, or really bring up what Dooby is trying to explain when it comes to like the cop is a part of the state, blah, blah, blah. It goes back to the social contract, in which in order for us to live in what is our current civil society, we cede rights and power to the state, and the state does some stuff so that, well, we don't all have to be civilian cops. When everybody is a civilian cop, well, I don't think that's going to be right because we're all going to be accusing each other. So
Now
we
you're
cede
bringing
up that
an
power.
extreme.
No, this isn't an extreme. This is a very basic. This is why we say in political science, or just in general, okay, everybody says this, is that the state has the legitimate use of force. They have the,
Wait,
legitimate
everyone
use of
says
violence.
that there are no cops. Everyone becomes cops.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Everybody's a
I don't think I
deputy.
remember
That's
that
not
from my
sure.
sociology.
No, it's like everyone's
it's
required
like-
to take justice into their own hands
It's-
instead of
it-
giving the authority to a state figure to carry
Right,
out
Melissa.
themselves.
So let's,
Yeah.
It's like
let-
okay, so
sorry,
we
sorry,
talked.
hold on. Sorry, I didn't want to let Universal in.
Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
Wait, I didn't get to my point.
Oh, did you not?
Just
Oh,
Okay.
responding to
all right.
Connors.
All right, go ahead.
I will trade a bit of my minute with you, Riverboat, if you'd like. I'll do this short, and you can have the rest of my minute. How about
Go
that?
for it.
Would that be okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that we might be missing some of the point of the questions, such as the sexism that's inherent in men always being protectors, women always needing protection. And the legal is very easy to. It's actually very easy. We could just consult the books and figure it out, right? I'm looking at more of more of the social, moral kind of aspects. Is why do we have these expectations from people based on their gender? So I don't know who wants to go down what rabbit hole. But also with Dooby, I think he's saying basically what I said at the time when George was killed. Nobody would do anything physically because that happened to be a policeman. They knew they could get shot if they took one more step closer. So I think that's an exception.
Okay.
I don't think that's
And
what
I
usually
would like
happens.
to
Okay, so I'm gonna give the
So-
rest of my time up to River if she can, because I have to take a very short break, and I'll be right back.
No worries.
Yeah, and I would like to jump in very briefly after Riverboat Jack.
Okay. So yeah, I was actually going to try and refocus this because honestly, I think that arguing that you have a duty, not a duty, but like a legal impetus to physically intervene with somebody who's committing a crime, I think that is a stupid legal precedent. And that seemed to be what Dooby was arguing for. But if like I wanted to take that, my entire goal with bringing up extreme examples and my entire goal with that was to point out that there is incomplete knowledge when you come to these situations and that you could be putting yourself into a significant degree of danger. Obviously that danger is more pronounced and obvious when we're talking about cops, because we know what cops can do and get away with in the United States, for one thing. When we're talking about moral duty that men have to step in and defend others, that seems to be something that is connected with another idea that I saw like Hans throwing around in this conversation, which is like your ability to successfully intervene versus unsuccessfully intervene. And so like I don't think that successful intervention is necessarily related to your gender. And so it seems like saying that there's a moral duty for men to intervene as opposed to women, when, hey, a woman might have a knife. That might even the playing field. A woman might have a gun. That might even the playing field when you're talking about intervention. And so gendering the question in this way, I think, gets us into some weeds and comes with a bunch of assumptions that I think are built on sexist ideas about how the world works. So that's to kind of refocus us on that aspect of the question.
Well, absolutely. And I think that people are just getting lost in terms of, because there are a number of states and a number of different legal standards that apply to each state, because some states have Good Samaritan laws where you have a duty to intervene if something's happening. Others don't. In some states, if you jump into a situation and you actually make the situation worse and hurt the victim even more, then you're actually legally liable for that. So I think we shouldn't get tangled up in those weeds, because we're just going to be here all day talking about different standards. But if we're talking about the gendered expectations of a man to jump in, just like what the question is asking here, then no, I agree completely with Riverboat Jack. I don't think that a man is morally obligated if he may not be the best equipped versus other people on the scene.
Okay. So what about? So I have two ways to really complicate this. One that's slightly related to which we're all talking about. One is quite different. So first, what about the police? Right? Do the police have a way to should they have a duty to intervene? Because currently they don't, right? Currently the police are no obligation to defend you. So if people were saying previously, right, then this should match your ability to actually intervene, right? Like to successfully intervene. Well, they have a weapon, right? And they have the authority of the state behind them. And so if anyone else is responsible, right? If anyone's going to be doing it, then it's the cops, right? So we'll start there, and we have other places we can take this. Go ahead, Counterpoints.
Good point, Prime.
Oh yeah, no, I love that you brought this up, because I think it's actually like a misunderstanding, not a misunderstanding, but it's more of like a separation of moral versus legal. So if a court finds that a cop has a duty to intervene, then basically cops are just going to be sued into the fucking ground. Like the institution is no longer going to exist. You know, my dad was having a heart attack. You got there too late. You had a duty to intervene. You drove, 59 miles an hour instead of 65 miles an hour. I'm suing you because you had a duty to intervene and you weren't responsive enough. And you can just extrapolate this out into every other situation. But I will tell you from a moral and functional perspective, law enforcement officers do have a duty to intervene. It just might not be legally upheld for like liability means responsibility, and liability is a term that's like constantly beat into the fucking heads of like law enforcement administrators, and even insurance companies, just from experience. So basically that's where like I would invite you, instead of being like, oh, there's a mass shooter, my like law enforcement can sit on their fucking dicks and drink coffee and nobody's going to say anything about it and they're not going to be held responsible. Nah, they're going to get fucking shit canned. Same thing with what is it, the guy from Parkland or whatever, who probably should have had worse consequences fucking imposed upon him, but he was shit canned. I forget what happened to his retirement, and then basically prevented from being in law enforcement ever again. Now So the point being is, moral from legal are separate. There's pragmatic reasons why this was argued in the courts the way that it was. And again, so like, I know this is probably the point that people want to attack, but I wanted to jump in with my previous point, which was I kind of wanted to ask the question, but I'm just making a statement. I want to up the capacity of the average person to intervene through volunteer social training. So first aid, situational awareness, self-defense, volunteer classes for middle schoolers and high schoolers. That way more people have the capacity to intervene. And then also, I'm curious about the spectrum, because we've talked about the spectrum of intervention. Hans has used intervention in this argument to mean physical intervention, physically intervening, but do people have a duty to report? So to boil it down, I'm not even going to boil it down. I hope you tracked everything I said. I'll leave it there.
Okay. We'll go on this, and I do have something else I want to try. So go ahead. Let's go to Kevin, and then let's go to Jack.
All right, so just to respond to that, I do understand the difference between the legal obligations of a police officer versus the moral obligations of whether they should step in. So, for example, if anybody is hurt, from an encounter with the police, you have the right to file a Section 1983 lawsuit against them, and you can essentially file a claim saying, hey, my civil rights have been violated. That doesn't just mean whether you've been discriminated against, but that also means whether you've had your head beat in by a police officer who got a little too zealous in his duty. So in that regard, when we're talking about the moral duty for a police officer to intervene, it's super tricky in the situation that we have now, just because of the fact that with the police being, I wouldn't even say as poorly trained as they are, because, no matter how well trained they are, no matter how many regulations are put on a police officer, with the way that the culture is right now, it's going to be a situation where, the police could inadvertently kill someone just because of what we've seen across the country with, I don't know if you guys were aware of this actually, but since the police unions have really started putting their muscle behind things, there have actually been more cases reported of police killings or police violence across the nation. So when we're talking about a situation where the police have a duty to intervene on a moral level, then I would be very careful to impose that on them as they are right now, because more likely than not, they're going to run into a situation. So, for example, say that Counterpoints is holding Dooby at gunpoint in an alley. I have no idea why this is, but, then a police officer comes by and they see that frog is being just a little too threatening and they cap the frog. Well, that ends up being a situation where, you've just killed somebody who was actually the victim of a crime going on. And you could apply that to the real world with people like George Floyd or other Black Americans who have been murdered for no reason. So I don't think that we should impose a moral obligation on the police as they are right now to intervene in things that are going down. I just think that would cause more problems than solve.
Okay. All right, let's go to Jack, and then Hans.
So I think we need to recognize that there's a distinction between like Good Samaritan laws and duty to rescue laws. Just to like throw this out there, in the United States, uh, there is very limited like duty to rescue coverage, meaning that like legally you are in very few cases obligated to like put yourself in danger or even like inconvenience yourself in order to help or assist somebody else. And there's a lot of case law for this in the United States going back literally over 100 years. You know, stuff like in 1907, People versus Beardsley. Um, Essentially, a mistress overdosed in the apartment of her lover, and her lover, instead of getting her assistance, just put her down in the basement, and then she died. And it was ruled that he had no obligation to actually get her that assistance, like no legal obligation to get her that assistance. Now, obviously, morally, you have an obligation, I believe, to get assistance, but there was no legal obligation there. However, in certain states in the United States, you do have, under Good Samaritan statutes, like a legal obligation to intervene as reasonable. And as reasonable can include like providing basic first aid if you know it, or just calling 911. Calling 911 in most of these states tends to be like the absolute bare minimum, and if you don't, it's a misdemeanor crime. However, when we're talking about Good Samaritan laws in general, the purpose of Good Samaritan laws isn't to tell people you have a duty to intervene. Instead, it is to cover those who believe they have a moral duty to intervene from things like accidentally, through, you know, their attempt to help, causing death or further injury, etc., etc. So we have laws to cover those who act on their moral duty, and very few to actually compel people to take action on what would generally be perceived as a moral duty. Just kind of
True
throw
and
that
base.
clarification out there.
Hans.
I think sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. So I think this might like help like guide like this discourse like a tiny bit. Who on the panel thinks you have a moral duty, or so you should have a legal responsibility to report a non-violent crime? Who on the panel thinks you have a duty to report a violent crime?
I guess I do.
Who feels like they have a responsibility to to intervene beyond that, beyond the reporting for either crime?
I do.
By the way, I abstain for all these.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
That can go into tricky grounds, but
All
I
right.
feel that you're not quite done, so I'm sorry for interrupting.
it's okay. So, like, I feel like what I want to break this down closer to is I'm not sure how we can have a reasonable talk about this if we don't bring up, like, say, specific situations, right? Like, I don't want to like bring it back to this at this point because it's already been so long. But like, say, dealing with a police officer versus say like an armed gunman, right? I think they're like fundamentally different situations because say like if I stop, say like an armed robbery, then or so like just like someone like trying to kill somebody else, and like, oh cool, like I'm a hero, like good job Hans. But like say like I like see a police officer like like accosting someone, and the police officer has a gun, and like they're like looks like they're threatening this like someone, and I like stop that person, stop the police officer from hurting them. Maybe I like I might have like just helped someone who like just committed a murder, right? And also like I'm going to be charged in a different way. Like if I what Jack was talking about, like the Good Samaritan laws or those kind of like things, I like the legal repercussions for say like stopping a violent non like uniformed person is different than say stopping a like violent police officer. And so I would say like further, if we want to go into this, I would say there's different moral obligations depending on like how much like physical danger like is for yourself. I don't think we should throw that away, because if we do that, there's an issue about like a moral perfection that I think we've been like moving around to, where it's like if you feel like you have a like if it's like if you morally like have to do something, like have to help, like regardless of like your physical safety, regardless of your competence in an issue, then I feel like once we've decided that, it's already like fallen apart, because at that point we have to do everything. Like every time I see someone that needs help that like I physically could like do, I have to go help them now. Every time I just don't think that's a way of like moving. So I'm just saying if we're putting the again, I don't think anyone raised their hand, and Senpai like abstained. But I don't think anyone here says that there's like a legal responsibility to like to physically intervene, or at least like physically intervene, like beyond like just reporting. What in the case it's calling 911, or in the case of a cop killing somebody, like recording it on your phone, right? Like both of those are like I would say are forms of reporting.
I think there can be. I
You
think
said
there can
moral. Did you mean moral responsibility or legal or both?
I was specifically referring to like legal in terms of that, but I would say like it's still moral. Like you still have a moral responsibility to try to help people, but again, like that has to be tempered by what is your capacity to help.
Yeah.
Correct. We all agree on that. But I mean, just because some of us feel like we have a moral duty doesn't mean we're automatically going to act and physically intervene. Those of us who are under a legal obligation to do so due to our profession or other commitments, first responders, etc.
Couldn't you
Doesn't
also?
mean we'll
Couldn't you
always
also?
physically do it either. There's lots of different ways to intervene. So I kind of wonder, what was the purpose? Where were you going with it? Where were you going with that question?
Where was I going?
Yeah,
Is like
because I just don't think that it's wise to be like a Goku, like in the background, and just run into a burning house to try and save someone. Because depending on the situation, that isn't going to help anyone. You're just going to have 2 toasty corpses instead of just one.
Yeah, well, I think people would say that that's an unreasonable thing to expect of somebody, right? But so when we started this conversation, I was actually on the fence about this whole thing. But I think as we've spoken about it, I'm leaning much more toward holding people to a higher standard, right? And I don't think it makes sense to say that. I mean, I raised my little frog hand earlier, right? When you asked if people should report nonviolent crimes, it's because I don't mean people need to report like jaywalking and shit. But if you see someone's car getting broken into, or someone's building being like vandalized or some shit, I think there should be some kind of responsibility to report that. I think you have a responsibility to the community to report.
I think you could also
bare minimum report that you saw this thing happening and give the police whatever information you saw about the person doing it. I think that.
Go ahead, Dooby. Finish your point.
Yeah.
Dooby.
Now, I'm not saying that in every someone needs to run to a burning building, or if someone sees 12 dudes jumping at a guy, they need to get involved physically. No, that'd be unreasonable, right? But if you see, I think it would be reasonable to hold people to a certain standard, and if they can get involved physically in a way that in a way that isn't going to put them in serious like harm's way or something, we should expect them to. I don't think it should be like a requirement, but I think bare minimum they should be required, legally required to report it. Right, and if they can't stop it physically, they should. I think that just saying that, hey, you don't even have a duty to report it. I think that, I don't know, that just seems like an easy way to get to like a society where, I think the reason a lot of people get away with shit as things are, right, in like communities like where I grew up, is because people don't report shit because they don't tell the cops, they don't want to talk to the cops because they don't trust the cops. And so I think that I'd like to avoid that becoming the standard. So I think we brought off one people to
Dooby, hold on.
I think a really good.
Hold on, because I want to move this. We don't have too much time, so I want to move this along. But one, I want to address something that Dooby just said. You had me until that last part, right? Yeah. Talking about the communities that you've grown up in, right? Because it reminded me of so many communities that are like immigrant communities, in which there's a reason why they can't trust the cops. The cops might, if they're here unlawfully, right, then the cops might report them, might arrest them, might harass them, like for all kinds of reasons. Like there's a good reason why they wouldn't want to. So I wouldn't want that type of person in that situation, where law enforcement has been cruel or can be cruel to them, to be forced to interact with the cops at all. So that kind of like actually turns me away from that point. But I wanted to ask about ongoing harm, right? So this is a bit of a trigger warning type of thing, right? A bit of a trigger warning. But so if there is a parent, right, that is like, for instance, physically abusing a child, right, but not the other parent, right? One parent physically abuses the child, not the other parent.
Oh.
Should that parent, and this happens continuously, right? Every so often, starts knocking around the kid. Is that other parent, should they be held responsible for not intervening? One, when it's happening, or two, afterwards, right? So the child's in a dangerous situation, but you haven't done anything. For whatever reason, you decide to stick around. So is that parent as well, like some sort of neglect type situation, right?
Do they have knowledge that it's going on?
Yeah, they have knowledge. They know. I mean, it happens in front of them. So
Okay, you're absolutely
hell yeah.
required. You're absolutely required to like report it. But again, like if it's happening, if it's say like Mike Tyson and then like a 5 foot like like woman who has no combat experience, I wouldn't like fault. I wouldn't fault her for, like not trying to like stop him.
Sure. No, but I'm trying to move it past that, right? Because you've all been talking about hot situations, right? There's a situation in progress and violence, right? So like, oh, let's insert myself physically in between these two people. Okay, great. So got it, right? So, but what about? All right, so that this person has beaten up the child before. You know they will beat up this child again in the future, and you don't do anything.
Like what if you're
you're morally corrupt?
That makes you responsible.
Are they morally, and legally? Should they also be legally responsible for not?
They are already.
Well, hold
yes.
on. Well, I think there's an issue with if you're the parent, right? You have that responsibility already to your child. What if you're the neighbor, right? And you know this is happening next door. Is there then some kind of responsibility?
Even better. Yeah. Let's go to Universal Discourse. Connor, then Jack.
Yeah, my personal feeling is that if you stood right there, watched this happen, and did nothing, you're totally complicit. 100%. Morally, you are absolutely complicit. Legally, what actually happens when you say, my spouse is abusing my child, here comes the cops and CPS, and of course, magically, the wounds disappear, and the spouse lies, and you're in deep shit because he's coming for you next. Men are really reluctant to report women who abuse the children, especially when they've taken the child from a previous marriage. Very, very reluctant. Honestly, I have no idea why. Can't seem to intervene. Bizarre. So I just think that personally, which is a total personal, if you saw it and you let somebody whoop your child, etc., and you did nothing, you are absolutely complicit. Should we make them legally responsible? And there are, again, cases where I think they call it criminal negligence. And then there's endangerment. So they're more likely to put women, to fine them, charge them, and put them in jail for that kind of thing than men. I don't know why. They should be legally responsible as caregivers of the child. The neighbor, I'm not sure about, because they may not understand what's actually happening, et cetera, et cetera. Morally, yes. But legally, yes.
But what if you do know? What if you do know, like it happens in front of you? You're a neighbor, right? I think the Doobie's point's even better. Yeah, you're a neighbor. You see
legally
a child being knocked
Yes,
around.
if you see it, I think if you see it, you ought to, you must do something. Should it make it legal to report? I think yes. I also think they're morally responsible, both.
Okay.
Can I just make a point really quickly about the spouse thing? I think that you run into an issue with making this about like an abusive husband or something, right? Because in many of those situations, the wife is also being abused. She's also living in fear. And if she reports this, she's, maybe he'll go to jail or something. Maybe the police come and take a look at the kid. But likely it's going to happen. He's still going to be in the house. She's still going to be living with the student. He might murder her or something.
Right.
So it just makes it much more difficult to deal with it. I think it's much better to just leave it to, like, if you're the neighbor next door, you're aware of something happening, should you report this thing? I think most would say that you should, but should you be required to report this thing? And I think so. I think we should hold people to that standard.
But we should or we shouldn't?
Should.
We should.
Someone in chat has a fascinating complication to this, so I'm gonna get to that soon enough. But all right, so let's go to counterpoints, and like try to keep it kind of quick because we're running out of time. So counterpoints, Jack, and then Kevin.
Yeah, so from an investigative side, I just kind of wanted to put in a little bit of 2 cents. Basically, oftentimes law enforcement is completely unaware unless somebody says something, and oftentimes it's not the first time that somebody says something that we know something's going on. So a neighbor will say, "Oh, hey, I heard some screaming," and then this, that, the other, and the kid has some marks on him, whatever. If that happens one time and then we never hear from that household or that neighbor again, then we just assume like, oh, kid tripped, the dad said, mom said that he tripped on a trampoline. They were angry because they didn't pay this bill or something like that. And, basically that shit, it's just not a priority because we don't have consistent evidence. Whereas if we get a report monthly, monthly, weekly, all that kind of shit, then where there's smoke, oftentimes there's fire. So not to add to the conversation, but I would basically say that if you're in one of these situations and you're considering it from the back end, if nobody says anything, nothing is ever going to get done. And I'm serious about that.
Okay, let's go to Jack and then Kevin.
Yeah, so just to kind of go over, often when neighbors report child abuse, cops or child services who report don't necessarily interpret the child abuse the same way as neighbors do. And as Counterpoints pointed out, it can get worse for the people involved or the children involved. And so just to kind of address that, if we want to start with let's see. So to kind of ask Dooby a question, I'm going to go through just some of the points I have written down. What are the lines of reporting? You say, you shouldn't report somebody for jaywalking, but you should report them for minor acts of vandalism. What's the line? I guess I'm confused about what your line is for reporting. Should you report somebody for driving over the speed limit? Should you report someone for I don't know, ignoring lawn watering codes? What are
I guess
your
the
legal
line
obligations?
I guess
under your interpretation.
Yeah, so I haven't fully fleshed this out yet, but I think that an easy line to start with would probably be property crimes, and obviously violent crimes. So property crimes, someone's tagging up a business or something, or someone throws a brick through someone's window, or breaks someone's car window or some shit like that. Yeah, I think you should be required to report those things. Someone's jaywalking or they run a stop sign or something. I don't think you should be required to report stuff like that.
Why? It's putting other people in danger.
Because the other property crime, you're literally doing harm, physical harm to someone's property, to someone's possessions, or potentially to a person.
Cases, in cases of jaywalking or running a stop sign, you're putting other people's lives at risk.
True.
So why is that less important than property?
I think that it would depend on the context. There are times when people jaywalk where it's just an empty road and they just don't want to have to walk all the way down to the other side of the block to get to the other end. But sometimes people jaywalk in the middle of a busy highway, right? And you are putting people at risk.
Both are
so
breaking
I think
the law. I guess.
Because they're both breaking the law doesn't mean that there's no other context, right? Of course, there's other context. So I don't think you should be. Maybe you can make a. Oh God, Eris is saying that I do that in the chat. I don't run stop signs. Fuck Eris. So maybe I think you can make a good argument for it. I just think that that's an easy line to start with, is property crime, and then we can kind of start branching out from there.
And Dooby, I want to take a shot at
Connor, you probably have a reason to arrest him. But hurry up, Jack, and then I do want to.
I had a few other things if we want to start with legal duties to intervene, it seems like the logical place to start would be with cops, with law enforcement having the duty to intervene. They are better trained, they are better armed than the general population. And to kind of, address Connor's points from earlier, you could write laws that protect cops in a more reasonable way. So it's not you drove slightly too slow to get to, my father's heart attack, so we're gonna sue you.
Just really quick. If we rewrote the laws where they have a duty to intervene, but when they have the duty to intervene, they have some level of immunity for liability or whatever, as long as they're acting in good faith and in line with their training, I think that's perfect. I think that's the perfect middle solution.
Yeah, I think if we're going to start with anyone being required to intervene in crimes, it needs to be whoever's policing our legal system in the first place, whatever body that is, whether it's cops or the police #2 electric boogaloo that has solved all problems with policing.
Gay luxury space police.
The other question is,
Yes.
can moral standards be unreasonable? Can you have an unreasonable standard to intervene? And like, for example, like Hans, you're very pragmatic. You keep coming down on like, do you have like a reasonable level of assurance that by intervening you're going to be able to make a difference? Well, I think that that comes down to like whether or not you might be able to succeed. But like succeeding is a different question than maybe your moral duty. You might still have a moral duty to intervene, even if you can't succeed. And
like,
I think
wouldn't that just be a really bad moral if it's unreasonable?
Because here's the thing, right? Because like let's actually like let's do like a meme like fun.
So
wait, no, this is
real
this
quick.
Is
I wanna just like to address Senpai Chow. I think most people have unreasonable moral standards. Most people
True.
have higher moral standards for themselves than they are reasonably capable of achieving. I mean, look at a lot of religious groups, for example, that create their moral standards around religion. I think that you will find most people in the Christian church are constantly striving and failing to live up to certain moral standards.
And then at that
just as
point,
an
the
example.
distinguishment is between what you preach and what you do. And there's a difference between what you say you do and what you actually do.
Right.
There's a difference between what you
like,
value and then you yourself as a character. And so
Right.
what I would say to those people is that they're hypocrites. And that those aren't really the people in which we ought to look to each other and see like, oh, they're the ones who set the high standard. Okay. And
But
I think
even if you set your own standards, you're going to fail your own moral standards.
Okay, but like
I mean,
But-
that's
So
why
what?
it's in the first place.
and then you're
You know,
a failure.
because
Oh, wait,
they can
wait,
at least be
wait.
generally applicable.
all
to
right,
Wait, hold on,
society.
but you
one second.
having more sense doesn't mean you need like meter all the time. It's something to strive toward,
yeah,
right?
like
Something
okay,
to
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Okay,
That's my
you
point.
strive-
My point being, you can have a higher moral standard than you are physically capable of achieving.
okay,
We all
but then like then
So,
like
sorry,
let me answer.
sorry.
Wait, this was the
Whoa! Thank you.
this
Who's
was
yelling?
fun.
No, hold on. Someone's been waiting. You never put your hand up, Kevin.
She mentioned me.
I
Like,
care, Kevin.
oh my god. Okay, like,
Look. Hans, baby. I'll hand having my time back to you. Don't you worry. But I just want to make this quick point. Basically, when we're talking about moral standards, it's impossible to govern society based on a single person's moral standards, because moral standards, as Riverboat Jack said, are going to be way too freaking high. In a way, that's why laws do exist in some capacity. Now, laws do not equal morality. That's a very, not to put too fine a point on that, but when it comes to something as dubious a question as a responsibility to, for example, report a family who's been abusing their kid and you're the next door neighbor, as Connor Point said, you have to look at things in the totality of the circumstances. So if there's one incident and it doesn't happen again, then, you may not want to put your nose in it. But if it keeps happening, then sure, that's a situation where you may need to jump, where you may need to at least make a call. This is why, for example, school counselors are actually legally required to report child abuse that's happening.
Yeah.
That's a legal and a professional responsibility. And, so I wanted to put that point in. And then Dooby, I actually wanted to respond to what you were saying about having a responsibility to report nonviolent crimes. I don't quite understand where it would be anyone's prerogative to jump in and report every single nonviolent offense that they may see happening, because we have our own internal biases, each and every one of us. So if we see a situation which may seem a little sus, but it ends up being a totally different situation, then by intervening in some way, we could be making it worse. I mean, that's what a lot of Karens do, and we don't, we certainly don't endorse Karens in this chat, I would hope.
I do.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
So
finish off, and then
it's
we'll go
abusing
to
the mandate.
Sure.
Hans and counter.
Yep,
So again,
and
I'm
I
not
am
saying
finished off,
every
so-
single.
oh,
I'm
sorry.
not saying every single non-violent crime. I'm saying if you see someone like committing like some kind of property crime, I don't think I don't think a property crime is that like mysterious, right? You see someone breaking a window, break into someone's car, whatever, right? That's not so mysterious. You just shouldn't get involved because something else might be going on. No, you should definitely call the cops, and I think people should be required to do that because they have a duty, not just to the person whose property that is, but to the community, right? To making sure that the community is a nice place to live in and grow up in. So yeah, I'm totally fine with holding people to that standard.
Well, let me ask you this, Doobie, just really quick. You know, when you're talking about somebody breaking in a car, breaking in a house, you know, how far do we take that responsibility? Because in a lot of cases, for example, you know, plenty of Black Americans have had the police called on them because, you know, they've lost the
Right.
keys to their house or their car, you know, and so I mean, I understand if, for example,
Well,
somebody's
sure.
like smashing in the window of a
Plenty of
car,
Black
like,
Americans
but
have had their shit saved because someone called the cops because someone's breaking into their car. Right. So yeah, there are like edge cases you can point and say, oh God, the police are so mean to this black, they're just trying to get into the house. Yeah, of course that happens. I'm sure that happens to white people too. I just had this case in fucking I don't remember. I think Florida. Everything happens in Florida. About the 16-year-old who was like tased by the cop. And that kid deserved it, by the way. So this kind of shit does happen, right? But I don't think that's enough to say you should just not get involved across the board when you see bad shit going on. It seems like you're saying that because you know, on the edge cases there might be mistakes that happen. You should just totally wipe out the possibility that you could make a positive impact in your community, and that seems really silly to me.
So,
Mhm.
I-
False dilemma,
well-
slippery slope. Yeah.
So Doobie, so as a CG4 put this in chat earlier, and I thought it was a good complication of this. Considering sexual assault victims, right? Many of them don't want to report the crime, but if you're aware of it, are you legally, or maybe even witness it yourself? Are you legally required to have reported that, even though they're telling you, I don't want to report this?
How would they even prove to you that it was illegal that you did that?
Yeah.
If no one's
Wait,
reporting it and they tell you not to report it,
Well,
how
I
would
mean,
you even
if they
be
find out
legally
later after the
culpable?
fact, you find out later after the fact that someone had knowledge of it and didn't report it, right? Yeah.
Like they find a serial rapist who, you know, and then they find
Mm.
out the victims, and it turns out the victims didn't report the rapist.
Yeah.
I think he's saying standby or
Oh, no.
standby for-
Yeah, I meant standby.
Bystander.
Yeah, it's bystander. Standby. A
That's
bystander.
what I said.
A bystander, yeah, who had witnessed it, or either witnessed it or
Oh
had
my
just
God.
found out about it later on, right? So this is something that
Oh,
happened.
no.
Should they
Yeah.
be responsible? What do you think, DB?
So you're saying that if the victim is saying that they don't want to report the crime, yeah, I don't care. I wouldn't care what the victim wanted. I think they should report it. I think that in a lot of situations, actually, I was watching a documentary yesterday about something like this, where a woman was shot right in front of her family, and the family did not want to talk to the police, did not want to report it, didn't want them involved because they wanted to handle it their way because they're all gang members and shit. That's stupid. Right, so shit like that is the reason bad people get away, right? And a lot of these situations, they don't want to report to the police because they're being abused or because they're relying on this person who beat the shit out of them or something, or the person's beating their kids. And I say, fuck that, right? We need like a better support services for these people, right? So if they can report these things and be safe afterwards. But I think that like if someone is in a precarious situation and they're being beaten or they're being robbed or whatever, and you witness it and they say, oh God, please don't do anything about it, it's okay, you know, whatever, he didn't mean it, and I say fuck that, report it anyway. I don't really care what the victim wants. I think what the damage this kind of shit does in the community is way more important to me.
Yeah.
Now let's go
Yeah.
to counterpoints. Sorry, Hans, and then counterpoints and Jack.
All right. So like specifically like responding to Jack about whether or not someone should go, even if they don't have any like reasonable like understanding of success.
To clarify,
Oh,
I
wait.
was
You got
talking about
finished.
you can have a moral imperative to intervene, even if you might not be successful, which is different than saying you should go out and like try and fight 12 guys.
Whoa, whoa, there's a problem there because the
wait,
first top.
Can I please fucking finish? Thank you, like senpai.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I just started the way like everyone's like jumping around. So I would not hold someone morally culpable or even say that they should try if there's like an extremely low chance or 0 chance of success. Like if I could like say stop like a single person being assaulted because there's like one other person, sure. But like let's say like it's announced on TV, like like it's the Cell games, right? Like Cell's like I'm gonna blow up the fucking planet if someone can't beat me in a fight. And I'm a pretty big guy, but I have like there's no chance I beat Cell, right? So like I wouldn't impugn somebody for not being able to do it.
Not with that attitude.
Tried. I have a reasonable thing about my capabilities. Like I could bench 3 plates. I can't beat a fucking planet buster. So like I think it's like at some point it goes so far past that I would hold like if someone's like I don't even want to touch that shit. Like that's terrifying. That's dangerous. And like in a non anime scenario, I would love to stick with Cell. But like let's go back to like the 12 guys thing. I wouldn't hold someone like morally like culpable like for not helping or like I feel like that's at that point it's an impossible standard. If we want to say like, oh, we want to live by impossible standards, that's fine. And like maybe I'm just like such an aggressive pragmatist to like, yeah, I have 10 days till the Cell games. I'm not fucking hyperbolic time chambering the shit. I'm gonna drink with my buddies. I'm like, we got 9 days left, motherfuckers. Like, let's make this a life.
That's not very plus ultra of you, Hans.
I can't beat Cell. I can't. I Krillin did his best. We all saw what happened. The Destructo Disc broke on Cell's neck, and Krillin's the strongest human. So like, what am I supposed to do? Like,
okay.
Again, Hans, not with that attitude.
So let's go to Riverboat Jack and then counterpoints and RD Zoid.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about like sexual assault and the duty to report, like I think we need to take into account that reporting to police is often one of the worst parts about like sexual assault. I'm gonna be anecdote Andrea over here, but like I have several friends who've been sexually assaulted and raped, and they had gone to the police previously for their past sexual assaults and rapes, and just it wasn't worth it to them to go to report to the police because the entire process can be very invasive and nothing was done in the past cases. So why bother doing it for current cases? It was just added insult to the injury and added pain and trauma on top of what they had already experienced. And so they didn't. And I think adding like, I don't know, legal ramifications for that would be wildly negative. But just to respond to Hans, I'm not saying, I'm saying that someone might have a higher ethical or moral standard for themselves or for others when it comes to when you should go out. For example, you might be like, well, one guy is reasonable, but somebody else, maybe like a Hulk Hogan or something, I don't know, like big buff guy, Dwayne The Rock Johnson might be like, yo, I could take 3 guys. So like, yeah, maybe his moral standard for how many guys he could reasonably take is different, and maybe his moral standard is higher for even how many people he should unreasonably take on might be different. And that's all I'm saying is that there's a difference between moral standard and reasonable chances for success for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Jack,
I don't know. I gotta say, I'm much less interested. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Hans.
First of all, I can definitely take multiple guys at the same time. Hey, boys. Second of all,
Really?
Really? Sorry, go
There are
ahead.
multiple holes, okay?
Oh my
I'm
God.
so sorry.
God, fucking horny. But Senpai, you asked if leftists were fucking horny, and the answer is yes.
Yes.
Literally.
Okay.
Okay. Like,
So,
let it be known, like someone in my chat said, and I agree with this, Krillin did his fucking best, and I will never fault Krillin, but like, dude, you're out of your fucking league, and you probably should have just like gotten pals and like for everybody.
Okay.
Yamcha did that because Yamcha knew his capabilities.
Okay, all right. Enough of the
Yamcha's
Dragon
a
Ball
punk.
talk.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Enough of the Dragon Ball talk. Our latest guest, Joe, has no idea what the fuck you're talking about. for her benefit, we'll try to keep anime and awesome things out
I
of it.
can explain the entire lore in under 5 minutes. Just give me time. I can do this. Like,
So
Just
we're
get
gonna
off
go
Scream
to
for 5 minutes.
We're gonna go to counterpoints and then Dieseloid, and then we'll let our good friend Joe. Oh, Doobie, you wanna? Because you were brought.
Yeah,
up.
I just want to. I actually, this. I know this is going to sound really insensitive, right? But I'm actually much less concerned with the legal ramifications for your friends who were, unfortunately assaulted or whatever. Much less interested in that, the negative impact that could have on them, and far more interested in the positive impact them reporting their attackers could have on the community, because now there's a possibility that these people be caught and they won't go off and rape somebody else and traumatize someone else.
How often are
So
rapists caught?
So if
Doobie?
that requires if that requires some legal ramifications for them not reporting this thing, then I'm fine with it.
You would have to prove to me that there is a greater utility to society to reporting sexual assault versus legally levying ramifications on people who don't report sexual assault after being the victims.
You're going to fall
Which
into
So if
would
nobody
require
reported
cops to
sexual
actually
assault,
catch
like, you think there's
rapists.
No, it's a bystander law,
That's
not
such a
not the
silly thing to
victims.
Well,
Yeah.
Doobie just said he's talking about the victims.
yeah, I think
You see,
victims
no,
should
no,
be
no, no.
required
If
to
somebody
report rape.
saw
yes.
a sexual assault,
Doobie's talking
Okay,
about
then-
experiencing the victim, like the victims.
yeah,
Like,
if
he's
somebody
giving-
saw a
yeah,
sexual assault,
I don't know why this
we
is
would
difficult
say
to-
that they should legally be obligated to report it, regardless of what the victim themselves said. But legally forcing a victim to report, like, that's, wow.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty fucked.
I don't
That doesn't even make
I don't think that's like much further than if someone sees a sexual assault, they're required to report it. If someone is sexually assaulted, they're not required to report it. Where's the disconnect?
Okay, because it's more complicated, specifically because unless we know that the person who did the sexual assault is going to be put away, that person now is like in immediate fucking danger. Because like someone's like, oh, like turns like, no one clipped this, right? Like, I'm not gonna do it. Like, someone sexually, let's say Doobie's non-frog body sexually assaults somebody.
He already addressed
right?
this, saying that there ought to be better infrastructure and there ought to be a better system that
hear you.
protects.
You
What?
can't hear him.
I think my internet cut out for a second.
Yeah.
Doobie already addressed that point when he said that the first or one of the priorities to even fixing whatever problem that we are talking about is making sure that when people do report that they're protected and that it's adequate protection.
Okay, then if we solve all problems, then like all problems are solved. So like,
So,
cool. Like,
Okay.
No, but if the only
Okay,
let's
yeah,
say
yeah,
they
well,
don't
but
catch
Doobie
this
also
person.
said
Sure,
current
sure.
rape
So
victims
he-
should be held
like-
legally accountable for
Okay,
not
so
reporting
like,
their
okay,
rapes.
you bring up a problem which you already solved it. Okay, nice.
Okay.
Don't
so,
bring up the
okay,
problem
so-
then.
So hold on.
Doobie said that current rape victims should be punished for not reporting their rapes.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
glad
I think
that's
they should
not
be
an
required. I
actual
think there should be a
legal
fine or
standard at
bare
all.
minimum. some
That's
kind of
not
fine.
really
Okay.
what he said.
He was talking about my friends who did not report their rapes. I don't know how you're
He did say
interpreting that.
that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
hold on, but the
So-
sad
that's
reality is
really-
that not
Doobie,
reporting those
quickly-
rapes probably led to more people being raped.
Okay. Well, this is
You
boy.
better clarify what you
assuming
said.
that
because
I think
you
he just
said
did.
that
I
it
think he
could be
just did.
taken out of
Let's
And-
go
and
to,
so, like,
so we got to move on. We got counterpoints. RD Zoid, Joe.
Yeah, so kind of back it up a few points. So I'm happy to hear people like got it out really quickly, but my internet skipped. Yeah, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with Christian moral standards, the whole point is to set a bar that you can't meet, but to strive for it anyways. And that's why I've been I've been trying to disassociate like legal pressure versus cultural pressure, and also asking questions about like the utility of educating people on like self-awareness, self-defense, first aid, all that kind of stuff. Because even if we have a cultural pressure that you should intervene. Hans is fucking based, by the way. That like basically like I'm not going to expect everybody to do what Hans does, regardless of whether or not they're men or women or capable or not capable or whatever. But I do want to up the possibility that that will occur. And then also just to bring this back to the gendered point, my estimation of somebody when it comes to like gendered expectation, masculinity, femininity, all that kind of stuff, my estimation of Hans individually, because he does intervene or has intervened in the past in potentially violent situations on behalf of other people, does increase my value of him as a person. It is along gendered lines. It is, you know, how we sociologically evaluate people, and it's just fucking true. So whether or not we legally hold people to consequence doesn't really matter versus morally or perceptually or sociologically. So I wanted to kind of address like the legalistic points that were brought up in the past 2 points. So why sexual assaults don't get oftentimes prosecuted is because the physical evidence related to rape specifically oftentimes needs to be maintained within like hours of after the assault. We're talking about basically bodily fluids. We're talking about clothing. We're talking about the scene of the crime, and oftentimes because of the shame and stigma associated with sex crimes, also oftentimes because they involve drugs, people aren't thinking with their full brain in the wake of the crime. So the part of the reason why sex crimes don't get prosecuted as aggressively and don't have high conviction rates is because oftentimes it's very difficult to parse out different people's testimony. And if it's a incident, like I said, where there's smoke, there's often fire. If there's not a consistent pattern of behavior with an alleged perpetrator, then it's very difficult to do that. So, but I am going to push back on Dooby as far as the legal threat to victims who don't report sexual assault. The reason why that is a massive bridge too far for me is because basically what you're doing is you're re-victimizing the person who was already the victim of a crime. They were already sexually assaulted, and then they failed to report to police. That sexual assaulter gets reported later on. You then go question that person, harass them about their own sexual assault to get them to admit that they've been sexually assaulted in the past, and then you put them in jail or send them to court. Like that's fucking wild that we would advocate for the state. Now, last point. I do think that there's a utilitarian argument to try to support the mass reporting of, mass encouraged reporting. But like you said, you would need that infrastructure that actually encouraged reporting. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So maybe, so I'm not saying there's people in jail or something, right? But I think where I was like a fine, but maybe you're right? Maybe a penalty in that way is too far. So my thinking on this is that in many of these cases, the victim is the only witness, right? And if this person is going around victimizing people, having a witness come forward and say, hey, this was what this person looked like, this is what they did, just having more eyes out, right? Letting the community know that this person is active in hurting people, it's probably going to make it more likely that this person stops, right? Or is caught, hopefully. And I think that you have a duty to your community with this kind of shit. So maybe just like finding some way to incentivize that. Maybe I don't know. Even like I don't know how you would even do that. But I think
confidentiality, like just to cut it at the head, confidentiality. People being able to report sexual assaults at the time of their occurrence without feeling like their entire life is going to be ripped upside down, being able to hold on to that evidence and hold on to that incident, and basically allowing people to prosecute in their own time. Basically, oftentimes people don't want to report it in the wake of the event because they don't want to turn over their entire life instantaneously. Oftentimes they have some kind of relationship with the perpetrator, so they don't know if they want to fuck up that person's life. So basically they just decide their hesitation and their fear of lack of confidentiality in the reporting stage basically leads to them never reporting it, and then therefore basically there not being enough physical evidence to secure conviction later on.
I mean, especially with the threat of retaliation.
Let's go to RD Zoid, and then Joe, and then Jack.
Well, I was basically just going to bring up from the conversation before that I think Hans was kind of talking about, where we would expect someone we would expect like a physical, like actual physical intervention against even one person. Like it feels like a lot of people are kind of just assuming that there's like a maximal risk that it only goes up depending on how many more people are involved. But like as we know, like things have happened in the past where like it's just been one-on-one fights where people have ended up dead from it. So I don't know why it would why would we even consider it like somebody to be expected to do something like that. Even like at its face, it's like obviously less risky, but the ceiling for that risk is still, I mean, it could still result in your end. So like I don't know why we'd expect anybody even just 1v1.
Let's go to Joe.
Okay, the issue with criminalizing not reporting your rapist or sexual abuser is that the barrier of evidence is much lower for persecuting or prosecuting someone who has not reported than it is for proving a sexual assault or a rape. So what you're essentially doing is silencing victims because they're not allowed to talk to anyone about the fact they were assaulted without suddenly having a legal obligation to report that to authorities. The other issue is a lot of the time people don't even realize at the time that they've been assaulted. The gamut of sexual abuse is extremely wide. There are some people who are attacked by family members. There are some people who are attacked by intimate partners. There are some people who are attacked by strangers. I think you can't in one breath say, oh, we need to criminalize not reporting because that keeps people safer, and then sort of rail against something like cancel culture or call out culture where people talk about the fact publicly that they were raped by someone because they know they don't have the evidence to take that to the authorities. On the other hand, also, I mean, like, I think Connor Points did a great job of discussing the issues with prosecuting sexual assault. Wait, I'm not done. I do think that maybe he glossed over the fact that sometimes police just aren't very good at handling sexual assault issues. Just generally, there is a sort of, did you provoke it? I don't believe you. Were you looking a bit slutty? It's not necessarily an individual cop problem. It's a systemic rotten tree problem of myths that exist about rape within society. So I think the standards are off, and I think this relates back to the general question, which is there is a difference between your responsibilities to stop a crime in progress and your responsibility to stop all future crime. I think that's a huge difference that needs to be acknowledged. There's a difference between taking action and inaction as well that needs to be acknowledged. And there's a difference in terms of what you should be able to be held accountable for across those things. If you are inactive during a crime that is taking place versus if you are inactive during a potential crime, well, if that's the case, then we're all legally liable because we could all be out there right now probably stopping crimes if that's our legal responsibility.
Just for clarification, Dooby, didn't you amend your statement? Didn't you change your mind, saying that it was too harsh to
Yeah, I
put
think
fines
I'd
or
agree.
punishments?
Yeah, I think that's where I started out, but I agree with what Connor and Silly said that. Yeah, I think a better way to be to incentivize it somehow. I don't really know how you do that. I think Connor brought up like anonymity is a really good thing. But I'd even go further than that if possible. I haven't fully fleshed out this idea yet. But like what I'm trying to get to here is basically that I think that people do have a duty to their community. Right. And even if they're the ones that have been, even if they were like a physically assaulted, someone beat them up or jumped them and mugged them or something. What that means is that there's someone in this community is that they're mugging people. So I think you should have a duty to report this to the authorities so that your neighborhood can be aware of this person out there mugging people and be safer as a result.
Okay, let's go to Riverboat Jack and then counterpoints.
And again, I keep coming around to the fact that I think police have a higher duty to fix these issues. And until police start living up to that higher duty, I don't think we can reasonably expect like victims of like sexual assault, for example, to meet higher standards. Like for example, like currently 80% of sexual assaults and rapes aren't reported because people don't trust the police for good reason. Because of the sexual assaults that do occur, there's a good chance that your rape kit, even if one happens, is never going to be tested. We have rape kits going back to the like 1970s
True.
that haven't been tested yet. In fact, we don't even know how many rape kits in the United States haven't been tested because cities and states don't want to give that access to like reporters, for example, because it will make them look bad. And in fact, we know because in the limited amount of access we've been given to these samples, that if police actually bothered prioritizing testing of these samples, we might be able to catch serial rapists. There was a famous story about I think a guy in Cleveland who had been raping people for like decades, and he wasn't caught until after his 12th rape because his victim happened to see him on the street. Not because of the police. The police didn't do squat for any of those rapes. And when we're talking about all of this, there needs to be some kind of assurance that like the cops that are protecting the community or supposed to protect the community are actually going to follow through on any of this. And even in cases where you have evidence and there are charges levied against somebody, there's still an infinitesimal chance that they're actually going to be charged. Like actually going to be like I might have mixed my words up a little bit. They're actually going to be successfully convicted. There we go. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
In fact, like less than 1% of sexual assaults actually result in a conviction. So like if we're going to talk about like making the community safer, we need to start with like the moral duty of the police to prioritize that.
Yeah. So Connor, I want you to be able to respond. I do want to like, because we're gonna go pretty hard on. I feel like the sexual assault aspect is gonna move us away from like the larger conversation, and we're. So I do want to move in that direction. But Connor, a lot was directed towards you, so I want you to be able to have that, and then we'll go on from there.
Yeah, so part of the reason why I came onto the Twitch politics scene in the first place was basically because I wanted to educate people about what was possible as far as reform and where to target their efforts. So for instance, I'll just skip this point and I'll cut right to Jack's point. So law enforcement officers, there is a lot to be done. Okay, I think I landed on the centrist position that everybody should accept here of scab. Some cops are bastards. Okay, but institutionally, there's problems as far as like law enforcement competence, as far as collecting physical evidence. You could address that through better training. But as far as like the DNA backlog, law enforcement officers collect the DNA evidence and then they submit it to the lab. That's their responsibility. If there's a backlog, a logistical issue as far as testing the DNA kits related to prosecutions, then you shouldn't be yelling at the police officers. They did the portion that they are responsible for. The people you should be yelling at are the state attorney's office or the politicians who should properly fund sexual assault investigations. So that's where, because the state's attorney's office, law enforcement officers, and politicians are often interlinked as your government, it's viewed as like all the same institution. But what I would say, I've said this in the past, I'll say it again. If you have the problem with the way somebody is being taken to jail, where the cops are being too aggressive or they're policing, they're beating somebody up, they're being dicks, like all that kind of stuff, then that's law enforcement reform, because that is something that law enforcement officers can control. If you have problems with the reasons why people go to jail, then you need to address that with politicians, because politicians are the people who basically create the laws. And then this will be my final point. The logistics backlog specifically, I think everybody is interested in, or every public person who isn't responsible for public funding is interested in fixing the backlog. But that's going to be needed. That's going to need to be targeted at politicians. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Hans, you had your hand up, but I do want to move away from, because I think it's going to be a different thing. So like, yeah. Hans, we can't hear you.
This isn't about sexual assault stuff at all.
Okay.
It was specifically like Jack touched on like about like responsibility, and like RD like asked earlier that I wasn't able to respond about like even like one person is like potentially like a dangerous situation. Again, like it's extremely case by case for every person based on like what you're like you feel like your capability is to help resolve situations. I don't hold anyone like morally culpable for like feeling unsafe to like try and step in during like times. Like it's like a personal thing for like how confident you are during like any given situation with the information that you have present, right? And like if it's one person, then yeah, like maybe you should be able to do it. Like would I like say, oh, like if I see one person and I'm like 5 times their size, and I could be like, okay, like maybe like if they're like harassing someone on the street or like attacking somebody, maybe I could step in. If it's like like half for Bjornsson, like world's strongest man, like he's like like a 7 foot, like 400 pound, like he's like the strongest like human being on the planet, I probably couldn't stop him. But like, so it very much depends on like what you're comfortable. And again, like this feel, I'm not trying to make this a Weasley answer for RD, but like very much contextual based on like the people that you might have to like try and like separate or stop versus like your own capabilities. And like you know that, like whether it's like how physically strong you are, what your like fighting capabilities are, like like Joe, like as a martial artist, she could like probably bend me into a pretzel. Like if she was attacking somebody, I'm not sure I could stop her. So it just really depends. Like what you're comfortable with, and like if you're not comfortable with like even intervening with like one other person, I guess I can't fault you with that. I would just say like maybe like I'm like hey buddy, like do you want to like like take some like taekwondo classes or like come to the gym with me so like you can be more confident to like try and help people, like what Connor said, like have more like a societally like volunteer things like weightlifting classes and self-defense classes so that more of us can like be willing to step in and like and help people.
So,
All right, but isn't the
sorry, no, we're gonna go to Jack since Joe was a direct response, and then we'll go to you. But I also want to let in Joe, because Joe had larger points about all this stuff previously, and I want to hear a few of those. But she is indeed very proud of her ability to do physical violence. She talks about it all the time. All right, go ahead, Jack.
I guess one of the main points I've been trying to get across, probably unsuccessfully, is just that different people have different moral standards. So I guess we have to talk about like, what do we mean when we're talking about morals in this situation? Because there are lots of people who don't conform to the same moral systems. So like, Hans, you seem to be basing it on like, could you successfully do this? And I think that like is a reasonable standard for like, a moral system. But like, there are other people who have different moralities and different ways of performing calculus about what is right and what is wrong. And so like, I think we need to actually talk about what do we mean when we talk about morality.
Well, hold on. Let me stop this really quick. Morality, literally, if you Google it, means what is good, what is bad.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh boy. All right, so Joe's about to explode, but let's go to RD's word first. Hold on, maybe we can keep her from detonating. She's cooling down. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I thought like the topic itself was more about like what as a society do we like expect people to do, and so that's kind of like an outward pressure towards yourself versus what you were talking about, which is like an introspective idea of what you're capable of. But I would say like even if you felt capable, I don't think it's fair to expect anybody to take on risk they want to otherwise. So like if there's a pro boxer like at a bar and someone starts getting in a fight, I wouldn't think it'd be fair to be like, yo, you got to get in there and stop this, just because we don't know what the ceiling of risk is going to stop at, because it could technically stop at anything for anybody. We just don't know like what people's capabilities are, or what if they could be possessing a weapon or things like that. So I just think it's kind of just a bad idea to like expect something of somebody in that regard.
Like RD, like again, like I don't think like you see that they could be morally punished. But if I say like saw two people, if like if I was at a party and two people were fighting and people and I like know for a fact because like maybe I've we're like in the same like jujitsu class or like at the gym, and I know I can easily take both these people, and I know they don't have any weapons on them, and then I don't do something. I think everyone else at the party is obligated to look at me and say like, Hans, what the fuck, man? Like you like let these people try and kill each other, and you know you probably could, like there's a very good chance that you could have stopped it. I don't liable, but I think like it's entirely okay to like look at that situation and say like, yo bro, like maybe you should have like tried to step in, like should have tried to do something. And again, that's like based on like your level of like what you're capable of. And like again, like I'm not, when I say reasonable chance of success, I'm not talking like 100% like I could beat the fuck out of this person, like they have no chance, like I'm just gonna like I'm gonna like Omni-Man them, like fist through the sternum, like there's nothing left. I'm not saying like I have to be able to do that to like anyone I try and like stop, or any situation I try and save. But like again, like it's a personal calculus saying like, oh hey, like I have a reasonable chance of success at making the situation better and not making it worse, and I'm most likely probably gonna come out of it alive. Then I'd probably try and do something. And if someone fit those categorizations, like from my like basic system, like if they like had the like those qualifications I just listed, like like reasonable chance of success, reasonable chance of making it better, like you're most likely not going to die based on like the factors that you can see in this scenario, and you don't do something. Again, I'm not going to say you should go to jail, but I will say, hey, like bro, what the fuck? Like we could have used you.
And I'm not saying you stepping in isn't commendable, but what you brought up in that situation was the other people at the party saying, what the fuck? If that were to happen to me, and I think this is totally reasonable, if people were to do that to me, I would think they are all 100% assholes for expecting me to step in and possibly risking myself to break up a fight that I wasn't involved in.
Not to
What-
mention the people
Yeah, but
involved in the
RD
fight could sue your ass for assault and battery.
Sure, yeah, you can get
come
you'd get
on.
dragged into something that
RD,
you didn't even
what
intend.
about this scenario? Okay, you're in a fight and you're losing, okay, and it's totally not your fault, 100%. But there are bystanders, and there is a friend of yours who could have intervened and stopped it. Would you have been like, yo, it's okay that you didn't get me out of that situation of me getting beat to a pulp, even though you could have.
It would be great if he did, although I think it's kind of weird that you would be like, bro, you were supposed to get in there and fucking have my back, like for any reason. Like,
Why
I don't
is
know
that
why.
weird?
Why are
no,
we?
no, I will die on this hill. Like, I absolutely would be like, bro, what the fuck?
What the
One,
fuck?
we're homies.
Same.
Why are
We
you
go together
expecting
to the
people
gates
to
of
fight your
Darkforce.
fights for you? Like,
Okay, no, but the scenario was that Senpai said was that it was like for a fact. It's like my old that they were able to stop. It's almost like, say, like my younger brother, right? He's like 17. He's like a little like piss kid, right? He's a fucking nerd. Like he has band and like all sorts of. I fucking love band, by the way. I was also a band kid. I didn't get big till college.
Come on, dude.
And so like another like 17-year-old like stringy kid that's never like walked inside a gym, never has any physical like training, was like bullying him. Or like, let's say they were adults, right? Because I'm not hitting kids. So like, let's say they're 18 years old, they're legally able to punch them. Yeah, like, and he's getting the fuck beat out of him, and I can easily stop it with little risk to myself, and I don't. He's totally welcome to be like, Hans, what the fuck, man? And everyone who's watching is also welcome to say, what the fuck? Because at that point, you could have like stopped something easily with little like harm to yourself. And like I'm not saying again, not prison time, but like morally, societally, can we shame that person? Abso-fucking-lutely. Like,
Okay. Okay.
Please let me go, or I will
Joe,
die.
Joe, please go ahead.
Okay. First of all, there is a difference between what the fuck behavior and immoral behavior. Of course, you can be pissed off at your friend for not having your back. That doesn't make it immoral. Now, there's a difference between first-person morality and ethics, what we decide on as a group to sort of agree upon. Because yes, everyone who said that people have different moralities is 100% correct. That's why when you look at social contract theory and social contract theories for morality, it's what could all people being considered agree upon as a standard, right? Taking into account all the different moralities, what can we agree upon? Now, in terms of the issue with this fight scenario that you keep bringing up and the use of utilitarian ethics as first-person ethics, you don't know as much as you think you know. You don't know all of the circumstances going into the fight. You don't know the backstory. You don't even know if you have information. You don't know that your information is correct. Secondly, you have no control over the consequences. So maybe you get in the fight and it escalates 100-fold and everyone piles into the fight and someone ends up fucking dead. Right? So this whole question about legal implications is to say, if you do something, where are the consequences? If you choose to act, should you be legally responsible for the consequences? If you choose not to act, should you be legally responsible for the consequences? Now, this traditionally comes up in moral theory using Kant's murderer at the door scenario, right? If an axe murderer comes to your door looking to kill your best friend and your best friend's in your house, are you morally responsible? Not morally, it's actually quite clearly ethically in this situation. Are you ethically responsible for that person's death if you tell the murderer the truth? This is the question. It's like everyone who says that law has nothing to do with morality is completely wrong, because our moral system is what we base our ethical system on, which is what we base our justice system on. So yeah,
Right.
you can be like, what the fuck if someone doesn't have your back? But once you start saying that that's immoral, that suggests that we should take it into account in when forming our ethical systems. And once it's part of public ethics, then we do have the right to question how the law should interact with that, how the justice system should interact with that.
Can you define ethics really quickly?
I mean, look, to be honest,
and also morality too.
yeah, okay. So
Responsibility.
to be honest, it flip-flops a lot in modern philosophy, but traditionally, morality referred to first-person ethics, so how you judge systems, how you judge situations, how you judge acts, how you judge actors, and ethics was public morality. So how we as a group agree that morally as a society what we're going to accept and what we won't accept. So why you might have a moral system that is theologically based, you might be a Christian and subscribe to Christian ethics. You wouldn't necessarily I'm doing it, I'm flip-flopping. Christian morals. Ethically, you might live in a secular society where there are certain rules in the justice system which mirror Christian ethics but couldn't be considered to be the same as your first person Christian ethics.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay,
I only died
continue with
before
this?
because I die whenever someone takes something big like morality
you did great.
and does a Google
Ah.
definition.
I'm jealous of your rant. Are we continuing with this, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah. We can continue with
Okay,
this.
so then I think a really good question for moving on with this topic is, are we going to be discussing our individual morality as in each particular panelist and then argue about that? Or are we going to think about this as a society, as like a group of people, or thinking about what we in a society ought to do?
Yeah.
I
What do you
think
want?
this was an ethical question, wasn't it?
Actually, before Kevin spoke, I would think that we weren't that far off from each other morally or ethically, or whatever the fuck I want to call it, right? But after hearing that Kevin wouldn't help his friend out in a fight, or wouldn't expect his friend to help him out in a fight,
You mean Zoid?
I'm just like totally like,
Zoid. You
well,
mean
whichever one it was, okay? I'm like flabbergasted that you
Well,
wouldn't think this is a bad thing. So
I
maybe
also
we're
don't want
too
you to
far off.
implicate
But I
somebody who is
think
completely
generally,
innocent.
I think not on Twitch, people aren't that far off morally to the point where they wouldn't think it's a good thing, right? If someone were to report a rape or whatever. And I think we all agreed about that, right? So I think we can maybe come to some common
No.
ground on some issues.
People did not
try to-
agree with that.
Yes, they did.
So I would like.
I have no
I-
idea.
I-
what was
Riverboat
just
Jack is
said.
literally smiling.
Well, it's like I was very much talking about like if we're going like ethics as like the societal thing, right? I was very much talking from an ethical perspective. Like again, like at the party, if I can like pull two people apart and like there's a pretty like good chance that I can do it, then like yeah, I would most likely be shamed. And I think that was like that's potentially like a good
It's
thing because like
acceptable.
if you have like shit tons of power, right? Like compared to like a regular person, like I'm not like that strong, right? But like if I could, if we're talking like hamsters or some shit, and I could just like pull them apart, and I don't. For a second, let's just give them human souls because like I don't want to talk about vegan shit for a second, and like I can't just like pull the hamsters apart. Then like yeah, then I fucked up, and if people see that, I'm just like staring there like like I have a pretty high chance of success of like saving these two hamsters from fucking killing each other. Like yeah, then like that's what public shaming is for. Like.
Somebody should do something about this.
Joe,
Yeah.
you had a response, a reaction to that. Then we'll go to Universal Discourse.
Yeah.
On my
Thank you.
face. No. It's to do with the idea of ethics as utilitarian. It's just something that I personally react to every time because Hans, in that situation that you painted, once again, you said, I have a reasonable ability to pull this apart. You don't know that. You don't know all the information. You don't know what's going to happen. And ethics is actually duty-based. It's not utilitarian-based. So it's this idea that we have a sense of what is good and what is bad. And if you start going into situations being like, look at me, like I'm a buff Pokemon dude and I can stop fights. Well, no, you don't know if you can stop the fight. You might actually make it fucking worse. So it's weird to base a moral situation on that kind of calculus when you don't know any of the information. Yeah, Connor, go.
Okay, so yeah, so basically that's weird to me because basically what I think Hans and I agree upon is social and cultural pressure and whether or not these things are good. So I didn't hear any like legal prescriptions from him, but I did hear some like cultural norms, cultural expectations.
legal.
I know.
Yeah, so social expectations. Hold on 1 second. And then what I would say is, so if we were to extrapolate that out, I would want to create a society in which disproportionately at parties, people took reasonable, not just parties, but any situation in which there was the ability to reduce harm, they would feel like their society permitted or even encouraged them to intervene when they thought that they could do good.
Okay, Connor, but I want a society where morally we shame people who start fights at parties and fuck up everyone else's good time instead of morally shaming someone into act when really they had nothing to fucking do with the situation in the first place.
Okay, but what are you going to
Why
do
not
when the
both?
shit happens
Why
in front?
not
Yeah,
both?
what are you going to do when it breaks bad? Are you just going to say, "Wow, we should really encourage a society in which this doesn't
you
occur
guys
and
would
we
You
just
don't
stop
know.
it because
You
you
don't
guys
know,
can just
Connor.
stop fights instantly, apparently.
No.
Okay.
You don't know exactly.
said a
You don't know
reasonable
that your
chance of success.
intervention. No, you don't know that though. Your reasonable chance of success is based
Joe.
on information that you don't certainly have and consequences
Joe.
you have no control over. Hit me.
Joe, I
No, no,
bet
no.
I bet my life on
Yeah.
this moral philosophy for 4 years straight. Yes,
Okay, but
I want more people to be like me. I want more Hanses in the world.
Oh,
Okay,
okay, well,
So
right,
are you
no,
going to get in
no,
between
no,
them
no,
and just
no,
start
no,
debating them about moral
God damn it.
perspective? Like,
Okay, all right.
Take it on the
Can-
ball.
I want
this
to
silly
be able to
serious.
morally.
so dumb.
I want to
Okay,
actually philosophically prove the world. All right, I'm getting this.
Oh my god, we're gonna start
All right
muting.
now.
That's even
I'm gonna start
philosophy?
muting
Or
you
is it just
all.
go-
Okay, muting.
Talking about morality, of course we're going to be getting to philosophy.
Hold on.
Holy shit.
Shut
We're talking
up.
about
Okay,
utilitarianism.
all right. Oh my god. All right, mute. Hooray. Hi. Collective punishment. Hooray. Okay, all right, we'll start there. All right, so I do actually want to hear more of this argument with Connor and Joe, but first I want to hear from Universe Discourse.
Oh yeah. Okay. Am I okay to talk? I got. Okay. I'm not sure where this is going. Anybody's ever been on my stream and heard some of my horror stories? There's a thing where certain people, due to their training, have their body is registered as a lethal weapon, right? So yeah, they are trained to intervene. All right. And I was hoping maybe we could talk about the liability of intervention for those of us who are trained to do that, to explore a little bit of what happens, including the reality that if you are trained in such a way and you do intervene, because you could be put in jail for excessive force just because of your capacity to intervene, which has happened. I didn't go to jail, but I have a good friend who went to jail. I've been in situations where, I had to go in and explain myself because of that training, which is incredibly intensive. And so I was hoping we actually could talk about that because it's pretty scary, but it is very interesting. Will give us a little more nuance.
I have a real quick question for you. Are those people who are registered as lethal weapons, are they not allowed on airplanes?
Sometimes it depends. You would
No.
believe it or not. Sometimes
That's not real. It's not real. People aren't registered. They don't have to register their guns. Their arms as like lethal weapons. That's
sometimes there are cases,
never.
but you get trouble. Yes, you do. We get a lot of trouble. We get a lot of trouble for a lot of things. But they're not restricted from. They're not restricted from flying. No, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. So I think maybe
Put your
there's
hands
not
down.
enough.
Go ahead, Dooby.
I think maybe the situations Hans is presenting and him like coming like Superman and saving people and whatnot. Maybe I can add a little nuance. I've also done that before, right? I've been in situations where I've had to break up fights, whatever. But I've also been in situations where, like for example, there's outside of a party, some dude shows up, pulls up in his car. His girlfriend's outside and just starts dragging her toward the car by her arm. She's fighting and screaming the whole thing. So I get involved and I break them up and get him to fuck off. Right? He leaves. And of course, afterwards, I'm the one that got shit on by her friends. Oh, why'd you get involved? Yada yada. And she ends up calling him to pick her up anyway. Right? Like, but I've had that on the other side where there's a fight between a couple. I break it up, and then the cops are called, and she actually files a report. Right? So these things do get messy. It's not as simple as you just save the day and everybody kind of picks you up and gives you a beer, right? So yeah, I think that is something we need to acknowledge. But I think that like I don't know, we should probably start with the baseline. If you can stop harm, you probably should if you have the capacity to. Maybe start there. And of course, you can add context, like, hey, what if I've got kids, right? And I don't want to get into some fucking fight at a party where people are throwing around fucking bottles and shit, right? That's totally reasonable that I wouldn't get involved there. So yeah, but I think we can probably start at that baseline. If you can stop harm, you probably should.
Okay, and on the terms of the martial arts, I've decided to Google it. So this is the day I found out website. They say, as to the easiest part of this particular topic to address, are those highly trained in hand-to-hand combat required to register their hands as deadly weapons in the U.S.? Nope. Except in one U.S. territory, Guam, They're entitled to in Health and Safety Division 3, Public Safety, Chapter 62. It states, any person who is an expert in the art of karate or judo, or any similar physical in which the hands or feet are used as deadly weapons is required to register with the Department of Revenue and Taxation. There you go. But so okay. All right. Let's go. You want to jump in there, and then yeah, and then Hans, and then go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, so my primary issue with Joe right now is that she said that she did not want more Hanses in the world. And I am fucking offended. Like, I am straight up offended. If
One's
all
enough.
of
One's
leftism,
enough.
no, if all of leftism was made up of like gym bro fucking Pokemon fucking nerds, I would be way more receptive to leftism. Unfortunately, it's filled with a bunch of like moral busybody, woke skull douchebags. So basically, no, I am deeply offended by the fact that you said that there should be there shouldn't be more Hanses in the world. It's disgusting, actually.
So
I'm upset.
Hey, what's wrong with Hans?
Well, he doesn't listen to me when I tell him to stop talking. That's why he's muted now. That's something that's wrong with Hans.
Then poo-poo, Hans. Don't disrespect the host.
So, okay, how about this, though? Before we go to Hans, right? And to everyone else, and this is something that was sort of brought up previously, but I'm not sure we fully flesh it out. The duty of citizens to interject or to intervene when law enforcement is doing something wrong. So, counterpoints.
Ooh.
You would agree. You would agree, right? I guess with the Black Panthers and what they were doing, right? And so the Black Panthers taking arms and watching the cops and making sure that they didn't cause trouble in African American communities, because
I believe in balance of power. So for instance, like, if there was like citizens on patrol, I do believe in the Second Amendment. I think concealed carry is way better than open carry. But philosophically, if there was like, let's say, rural area, high crime area or whatever, and there was a way to integrate pseudo-trained people who understood liability, understood the law, understood concealed carry and all that kind of stuff, I would be way more interested in those kind of people taking on those roles in society than basically saying like, no, the only people who can wield any kind of force whatsoever is law enforcement, and the only other people who can wield any kind of authority is criminals. So basically, spiritually, I think there would be a way to do it like logistically that would basically prevent incidents in which a misunderstanding could lead to death. But that would involve a certain level of mutual understanding and communication and logistics and communication.
Everyone here has been talking about unarmed situations, right? Like, well, other person's unarmed, and at that point, I think I can do something about it, right? Like, I didn't see a weapon, and so now I can intervene. But when there's a situation, one, where both of you are armed and both are civilians, should you intervene, right? And then two, when both of you are armed and one of you is an officer, right? Should you intervene?
Can I want to address this directly, and I'll try to be quick. So basically, like
after counter.
Can I ask? Do you mean should you intervene between two people who are armed?
Oh no, good question. Good question. There is one person who is armed who is intervening in a situation with another person who is armed, right? You're the third person armed.
I got it. I got it. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. So basically, to break it down, I'll try to use the proper terms. Ethically, I don't think that we should expect society as a whole, like everybody, to be as badass as Hans or myself or Joe. Okay, I don't think that should be a thing. Okay, but I wouldn't mind encouraging society. In the specific anecdote that I have was in the UK. There was, I believe, 2 separate terrorist attacks involving knives, blades, and machetes. During one of them, it was like at a bar, and there was a guy who like screamed like Millwall or some shit like that, and then started fighting the attackers with a beer bottle. And as a result, literally more people escaped the bar while he literally fought terrorists and lived. Also, there was another story where I literally want to say a Polish worker at like a museum in the UK on London Bridge. He was carrying a narwhal tusk for some reason, and he literally beat the fuck out of like a jihadist with a vehicle, or who did a vehicle attack and then a knife attack. So my point is, I would love a society that encourages people to intervene when they see awful things going on, but I don't think we should expect individuals to take on that risk, and that should be their choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin.
It'll be 2 seconds.
Sure.
I just want to say, Connor, that those examples are great, but they don't rely on anything more than moral luck. In those situations, it wasn't the circumstances and the calculation that the person did to work out whether or not it was reasonable to intervene. It really was that they were lucky that the circumstances and the consequences ended up being in their favor.
Wait, hold on. Hold the
No,
fuck
no,
up.
no,
I'm not
no,
going to
no,
let this
no.
slide.
Yeah.
You think that if
No.
you see somebody stabbing other people and driving cars into other people, you can't make a moral calculus about whether or not that person is doing the right thing?
No. The judgment of that person, you can totally judge whether or not they are morally doing the wrong thing. Of course, that's immoral. What I'm saying is to judge someone for not intervening and say that not intervening when someone is stabbing someone is immoral would be incorrect, because to be moral and stop someone stabbing someone requires all these circumstances to go your way, which you actually have no control over. So it has nothing to do with the immoral act of that person.
No, I don't agree
But this,
with
hold
that.
up. But this is why this is why I would want social encouragement, because I admire people who take on risk and try to do the right thing. When we're talking about people who leave allies,
sometimes people do that. Sometimes people take on the risk and make the situation worse.
Okay,
And
so what is your calculus for when we should do anything ever?
I fucking hate calculus. It's the one thing you should know about me. I never ever use calculus or arithmetic for moral sort of realities.
Okay, so
Anyway,
so hold the fuck up. So
it was just meant to be an aside.
hold
It was just meant to be an aside. It was just meant to be an aside.
No. If you want to counterpoints, yell at her. We got time.
Okay,
Don't
Jeff.
Hans,
Okay,
Hans, motherfucker. We'll get to you.
Okay,
I'll
I'll try to be brief. But at the same time, like this is so weird to me, because we've made moral judgments throughout history that were basically completely reliant on chance, and as a result, things worked out. Sometimes they worked out bad. Sometimes they worked out good. So as a result, like so for instance, like when you're the person who's intervening, let's go ahead and back up and do the most obvious like war equation in the world, like World War II. Well, let's not get involved because we don't know if Germany is going to liquidate the Jewish population of Europe. So let's just like not even bother getting in there.
No, you don't make a decision like that. No.
Why
you don't
not?
Make
Hold on.
She's not British. She's not British. She's better.
We can make this a lot more simple.
Hold on.
You don't make decisions like that.
Hold on. I want Joe to respond. She's not
You
British.
don't make decisions like that based on calculus. You make decisions like that. Well, first of all, you don't make decisions like that based on morality at all. Be real about why we intervened in World War II, or you guys intervened in World War II. That's just me being a sarcastic for a minute. But secondly, you make it based on a moral duty, not based on any sort of calculus about whether or not you're going to get a good outcome.
Okay.
What do you do?
Joe,
What do you base
I
your
think
decision to intervene on?
Yeah.
Joe, when you intervene, what is your decision based on?
Because
What's it
it's
like for
the
you?
morally right thing to do.
It's like an instinct.
We're talking past each other.
Yeah, it's an aside point. You're going to get too deep into
No.
it.
Joe, I want you to answer the fucking question.
I did answer the fucking question.
But what does
She said it was
I
moral.
did answer the fucking question.
Yeah, she said it was a moral.
Yeah, but
Majority.
when is it moral for you then? Or do you just
What's your
I
moral
mean,
It is
calculus?
interesting.
I'm not a consequentialist or a Kantian or any of that stuff. But what I'm saying is to suggest that we intervened because there was moral calculations, it was a utilitarian calculation, is just false. I mean, you intervened because genocide is morally wrong, and you can acknowledge that in some sort of way.
Yeah, it just sort of doesn't happen that way in real life. In other words, you don't think about moral. You act because you can.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. People didn't intervene because it was the moral thing to do. I think that's a complete lie. Because if that was the case, we would intervene in all sorts of things.
No, absolutely. We didn't intervene in World War II because it was moral. Absolutely not. American fiction right there.
I have
hold the fuck up. She's a goddamn philosopher.
One point of contention, one only, in terms of you did this, you intervened, you was luck in this. I mean, the way my training, right? I know whether somebody is more dangerous than I am. So it's never a matter of luck.
So no.
No.
If it's in your profession, obviously your obligation to intervene is different to
Well, you
any
gauge
other
it.
layman.
You can gauge the
Of course,
situation better.
in law enforcement or any sort of EMT service or anything where you're interacting with people as some sort of authority, you have to use calculations for reasonableness. Of course, that is necessary for you to perform your job. But in terms of creating moral standards, I'm just saying there are other ways, and that's to do with individuals and as a society, not people in their jobs judging whether or not
Yeah,
they should
I
take
follow
action.
you. Yeah, I follow you. I
So-
follow you. Okay.
So,
I just know that when that happened with me, I just did what I did, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
There wasn't any thought.
So before we go to Kevin FM, counterpoints, you were going to say a sentence. She's a philosopher and...
Yeah, I don't want to let her fucking wiggle around, dude. Fucking morality. Okay, so morality. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, since you're the experienced person here. But morality, if I go to google.com, it says morality is the study of good and bad, which is obviously incredibly subjective. So for you to say that World War II had nothing to do with morality, you can say it wasn't a primary motivator, but you can't say it wasn't a motivator at all. You can't say that
Thank
like
goodness,
Britbongers,
Connor.
oh my goodness, Joe. So you can't say that people in the UK are watching their fucking houses getting firebombed and they're like, this is bad. I would like this to stop because not getting blown the fuck up is good.
No,
Therefore,
but
I'm going to make a calculation about good and bad, and I'm going to say that destroying Germany is a moral bad, but it's an acceptable moral bad. I'm going to go ahead and excuse the atrocities of warfare because I want to end this shit that's affecting my tribe. That's a moral calculus. How is it not?
Nation states don't do things for moral reasons. They do things for practical reasons.
So the only reason why
individuals work on moral lines, nation states are literally constructs devoid of morality.
So
why?
Why?
You're saying that sentence very confidently, and I have no idea what you're using to back that up. Why are nation states devoid of morality?
Because nation states don't act on moral lines.
What? Why?
Do you think that we just didn't invade Rwanda to stop the genocide because of some complex moral calculus that the United States does in a secret United States machine?
No,
it's because
but I
we
don't think
operate
morality
on
and
moral
logistics
lines. We operate on reasonable and concrete materialistic lines. Which is different than individual humans.
This is like using subcomponents of a massive fucking term to say that we don't use the massive fucking overview idea.
It's literally the same as saying companies don't operate on moral lines because the point of a company is to create profit for the people who own it.
I don't believe that either. You're basically saying that human beings act on moral judgments, but institutions composed of, and acted upon by human beings don't.
Yeah, because the institution is not a human being.
Correct.
I'm gonna eat
but isn't it just
it is a systematic machine
TV.
created to do a specific purpose.
Isn't it just
you and Joe have made
that
insane
have,
assertions about human nature without backing them up at all? I want to fight, dude. I'm about to eat this fucking paintbrush live on stream.
You're the one
right
making
now.
assumptions about morality here.
So Jack, wait, hold on. So Jack, do you think that so if a group of human beings comes together, they organize themselves into he was using corporations or nations or whatever. Let's say fucking village, right? You think that they couldn't act with some kind of moral foundation, was like a certain ethical foundation?
What is the purpose of forming their village?
To maintain the well-being of their village.
That doesn't mean that they don't apply. I want to use the word. That doesn't mean that they don't apply some moral calculus to decisions within the community that come up.
It's to maintain their community.
Right, but that doesn't mean that when situations come up, they don't apply some kind of moral calculus to that situation to determine what action they're going to take.
That is okay.
Right.
What is the government structure of this village?
Hold the fuck up. No. I'm going to blow this the fuck out. Governments primarily fucking institute laws. What the so governments don't act in moral reasons, but they institute laws that they impose on everybody else based off of, according to Joe fucking 10 minutes ago, fucking ethical and fucking moral considerations. But somehow governments can't make ethical and moral considerations. And I'm pretty sure the reason why fucking Joe is quiet right now is because you know that this fucking position is untenable. It's fucking untenable.
Did Hans just rip his shirt off?
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Can I just say
Yeah, about my
no,
position.
no. Counterpoint. I
We're
mean,
all deadly weapons. I want to know what all of us killers
feel
think
like
about this shit.
I have caused enough mess. I do want to say that you
Holy
can
shit.
consider the moral dimension of something without
Nah.
morality being the motivating force, right? That's all I'm trying to say. There can be moral components to something. Of course, intervening somewhere like I don't know, Syria would have a moral benefit, right? Sure, you could say there was a moral aspect to that. That doesn't mean that morality and the fact that it's the morally right thing to do and the fact that calculus was done that determined it was the morally right thing to do is the reason that the action was taken.
Okay. So,
Sure, it's one
Okay.
variable.
Yeah.
So we're gonna let other people in. I feel like what has to happen here, right? And just like I think would be very valuable if Joe and Connor had a 1v1 debate. I think that
I will fight her
Oh.
any day, anytime.
Would you like that,
Now, you
Joe?
bring me in there,
Joe?
buddy.
Fuck, why not? Why
What
not?
that-
Why not? Okay, all right. So that'll happen later. We're gonna make that happen. It's gonna be gold. And there's so many ways we can fight each other on so many subjects. I know it. It'll be beautiful. Oh my god. This is amazing. All right. So we're gonna go to
I'll be right
Kevin FM, and then we'll go Hans, and hopefully he's learned to not fucking interrupt me. And then we'll go to Senpai Chow. All right, Kevin.
He's trying, but nobody's listening to him. Look.
Yeah.
I
because
completely
he's-
forgot what was going on.
Okay. All right. Then we'll go to.
No, I'm kidding. It's just to, I think just before we got off into the discussion of statecraft, and the only thing I want to say is, like, to the original point, when we were talking about, whether civilians have a duty to intervene when it comes to, things that they may see going on versus the duty that police officers have. What I want to say there, first of all, is, there are laws already on the books in multiple American states about when a civilian has a responsibility or has the ability, I should say, to make a citizen's arrest, which has the same force as a police arrest. So in that respect, if you see a crime actively being committed in front of you, which is what the standard would be, then you would be able to make that citizen's arrest. But when it's something that you might suspect as being a crime, like, for example, a suspicious looking person standing outside of their house fumbling around at the door, then that's not the opportunity where you would make a citizen's arrest. That's where you just leave things alone. In terms of the police's duty to intervene on this kind of stuff, they should have a much higher standard on when to intervene on crimes going on, whether not just legal, but moral, because they are capable of using a significantly higher amount of force when they are responding to something. So, I mean, I don't know if that maybe helps to, like, steer us back on track to where we were. I have no clue, but those were the 2 cents.
All right. Let's go to. We'll go to Hans, and I will unmute him right now. And Hans, have you learned your lesson to quiet the fuck down when I ask you to? Yes or no?
Sure, you power mad little man.
Okay. Well, moving on. So, Senpai Chow. Hey, buddy. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, Daddy. Okay, 2 points. Am I? Yes, I'm
I
not muted.
actually have something to say, and I
2
would like to
points.
get in.
I guess I'll first talk about Joe, which is when you mentioned about how there's the element of luck at the end of every action. I agree. I don't think that's wrong. The problem is that at the end of the day, everything comes out to be luck, and that because everything comes out to be luck, then do we have any reason to to make a calculus to
you
even
agree with
think
me?
about actions.
Utilitarianism is dumb. Yeah.
Okay, no. I don't think it's dumb. Okay,
Yeah,
I
it's
don't think
silly.
it's dumb. I don't think it's dumb. What
Mhm.
I do think is that at the end of the day, everything at the extreme is dumb. So then, at the end of the extreme to utilitarianism, I think you brought that up pretty nicely. But at the end of the day, your extreme is that we shouldn't do anything because we don't know.
I never put forward a
It's
positive
like
argument
50
actually, so I don't know.
That's
know
the
what you're referring
implication.
to.
Okay, so that's kind of what I got from it. And if it's not coming from you, then it certainly did kind of come from Zoid before. It's like you guys, yes, you guys were kind of saying the same thing.
Well, yeah, I
at
mean,
least from me.
Senpai Chat, that makes it. You make a good point, right? Because something that's really important in my understanding of ethics is that there is a distinction between action and inaction, and I do think there are different moral weights and moral responsibilities that should be assigned to a positive action and negative inaction. So yeah, I guess
yeah.
you're correct.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if Hans isn't going to always intervene, but he did say, at least from what I know, is that when he sees that he could intervene and that he sees that it's a good action, it may not necessarily occur that way, but that's due to post hoc analysis. Okay, we all know that we can't all predict.
I
the
would
future,
like to speak.
but he would probably also consider non-action as well if it's reasonable and if he thinks it's the good thing to do. Okay, address that. Second point, I want to address Riverboat Jack on international relations, the motivations of states, and it's not all about self-interest. I could send you a couple of articles in which some countries had made internal domestic reforms due to international pressures from advocacy groups, from other states, etc., etc. There is something to say about norms and morality or even ethics influencing countries to countries, even though there will be the realists who would say, no, at the end of the day, it's all self-interest, blah, 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 blah. I think there's a balance between institutions, self-interest, and norms.
Can I just respond real quickly? Because I agree.
Sure.
I think there are individual actors within these systems that are doing things for moral reasons, that are pushing
Wait,
for example,
what do you mean individual actors? Do you mean individual countries?
No, individuals within like their nation states.
Okay, so like, okay.
I think this is a different thing than like international relations, because international relations are extremely complicated and complex. But I think usually nations advocate for things and expend resources doing things that are in their own best interest. Because the state exists to perpetuate itself. And I think that there is this misunderstanding that like that means good things can't happen, or things that we can construe as moral can't happen. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is, like, for example, pushing for like LGBTQ acceptance in a country that doesn't currently accept LGBTQ people. You might be doing that for like an individual within this system might be doing that because it's like a good thing to do, but the overall system might be pushing for that because, for example, it gets more labor into the accepted labor pool and helps to decrease how much one would have to pay for labor. Like these are like knock-on effects for certain policies that people might largely regard as purely moral. They have materialistic effects, and that's why nations tend to advocate for them.
Yeah, this is a common response to this kind of argument. Just for everybody to know, I'm a constructivist, so I pay a lot closer attention to norms than do other IR theorists. That what you just described, even though they're maybe making some reforms that may not necessarily be for the norm, it may not necessarily be for the morality, it's part of the process. Because at least how I would explain it is that there are cultures of there are different cultures in which we first start from self-interest, but then as time goes on, as it becomes more ingrained in society, then it becomes more of a societal norm. And then depending on where it goes, it could either be a strong norm or a weak norm. But then we do first start with self-interest, and I'm not going to argue against that. But please understand that that is part of the strategy in advocating for norms. That's how we get to the norm in the first place.
So I want
real quick, can I respond
Jump
just
time.
because my
Sorry.
name was invoked?
Sorry,
Um,
I want to go to Hans. So let's go there. I'm gonna mute you. All right. Oh, he's deafened. Never mind.
Can I go?
Never mind. Fuck it. Whatever. We try. All right. Well, okay. No, go ahead, Zoe.
Well, okay, so at no point did I say that it wouldn't ever be, or it would never be commendable to put yourself in a situation that you might be able to, like break up a fight or something like that. And I've definitely put myself in that situation before in the past. The problem that I had was having some sort of expectation to do it. It's not that, like, I won't find it noble of you to do it. It's the pressure or expectation from others that you should do it, or that you should put yourself into harm's way.
Yeah, I heard that. But I think you're misunderstanding what the point that you made that I was referring to. In that when Hans was making his analogy or his hypothetical, and he brought up that, okay, if I go against 13 guys, I probably won't do it. But if I go up against one, I might. And then you brought up the fact, and I agree, okay, that this is something that we have to consider, that, well, what if that one guy is really buff? What if that one guy has a gun? What if that one guy has a weapon? Then all of a sudden, that calculus of numbers falls apart. But kind of what you implied in that critique is that you can't predict things. You can't predict outcomes. You can't predict the situation. And that really does fit in with what Joe was saying, in that at the end of the day, outcomes has a luck factor.
Yeah, that's why I said it.
Okay.
Like, it seemed
Okay,
like Hans
so-
was
so-
kind of, he was assuming an outcome.
So I wasn't wrong. Okay, let's be clear. I wasn't wrong that I referred to you when I was talking about a point that Joe made.
Okay.
It's just
Okay,
all luck,
okay, so
though.
this was a
Well,
this was a
the luck that
misunderstanding.
matters
So, well, Han, we're gonna.
is bad.
So we're gonna go to Hans. He's finally undeafened himself, so he can actually take his fucking turn. But before then, I gotta give my special friend an outro. Yeah, that's Joe. Joe is amazing. Joe, I love her. Thank you for coming in and helping us out. Joe, you've once again raised the level of discourse. So everyone, like, I want you to go. I want you to follow my friend Joe. Exclamation point Joe in chat. She hates when I do these things to her. But I do it anyway. Exclamation point Joe in chat. That's her YouTube, which is blowing up. She's going to come up with a new YouTube video out soon. She has one that's amazing and everyone's been talking about it. She's going to have a second one, which also be amazing and we'll be talking about. And she's going to be streaming soon, right? So you don't want to miss out. Go follow her right this moment, okay? So follow my special friend Joe, and she absolutely deserves it. Joe, you going to say anything to the audience?
Can you please not make me this big? This is terrifying. Thank you for letting me crash your panel. I'm sorry that I caused so much drama.
It was worth it.
Moral philosophy is really cool. I'm going to be streaming later. Keep watching this stream, but if you want to go back and watch the VOD, I'm doing like sort of intro to philosophy stuff. So going over a lot of terms and a lot of basics that you need in order to engage with philosophy, particularly moral philosophy, because that's where most people start getting interested. Yeah, sub to this channel and free Hans.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye, friend. Oh, wow. It just defaults. All right.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
Here we go. All right. Let's get Hans in and go from there. Hans?
All right. I really just wanted to talk to Joe about like the concepts of moral calculus, but she's gone. So, all right. Thanks for muting me for fucking 20 minutes and wasting like this half of my night, man. Like that was really fucking rude.
No, fuck that. No, dude, don't.
Everyone was yelling. Everyone was yelling, and you only.
No, holy shit.
No, that's not true. I was in the prison as well.
He was also muted. And when I say stop, this is not the first time. When I say stop, stop. That's the end of it. You do this all the time. You continue on afterwards. Holy shit, dude. So if you have something else to say, you can. If not, then fuck it.
I'll be right back.
We can still talk about it.
Are we doing like another? Are we doing another topic? Or,
No, we don't have enough time for another one. We can finish out the.
Man, I was really looking forward to that.
All right, no worries.
Okay.
I don't got anything else to say.
All right, fair enough. For the rest, go ahead, Connor, please.
Muted.
Yeah, you're muted, buddy.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, so like, it sounded like you guys kind of landed on it while I was gone with Joe, and I wanted to address Joe as well, but that's okay. We can do it another time. Basically, like, I don't have a problem with saying that primarily people are self-interested, or primarily institutions or governments are self-interested, or primarily corporations are self-interested. But that being said, I think that we can just concede that the world is complex and there's multivariable factors for why people do what they do. So, for instance, when a company adopts an environmental policy that's beneficial to the environment. Now, maybe that's a self-serving calculus where they're saying, oh, there's a bunch of like lefty, liberal, progressive douchebags in California who really dig saving the trees. So we're trying to appeal to that market. And maybe they're making a calculus that's gonna be ultimately self-interested. But that doesn't mean that there's not people involved in that institution who are like, no, this actually benefits the world. That also doesn't mean that there isn't a part of the company, the cumulative consciousness, the zeitgeist of the institution that says that, you know what, in order for us to continue operating as a company, we need an environment to operate in. Therefore, we're going to adopt a more environmental stance. So that's kind of what I wanted to get to.
Yeah. I hate when people equate people with things that people build. Like, a person is not the same and does not make the same kinds of decisions as a company. And a company doesn't make the same kind of decisions as a nation state.
Well, okay, but then this is weird because I feel like you could flip the. Sorry, Prime, if you want to move to something else. But basically, basically that's weird to me because when we talk about like the Dutch East India Trading Company or the British East India Trading Company, often what we say is that they did unethical or immoral things. They used slave labor, they killed people, they destroyed towns, they displaced, indigenous folks, like all that kind of stuff. They signed like unilaterally beneficial treaties. They acted in ways that we would like use the term unethical or immoral because we're taking like it is an institution ultimately made up of human beings, and if this institution was an individual, we would indict it for acting immorally or unethically.
Well, I think there's a big difference between saying this thing was bad, like that action was bad, and talking about like the effects and like the ongoing issues with like colonialization and stuff like that. I think there's a big difference between that and like the moral calculus that individuals do.
So if I was to impugn,
you literally can't judge the British East India Company as if it were an individual. I think that's like a ridiculous.
So if I were to impugn their actions rather than impugning the institution, would that be like a sufficient like rhetorical jump? So that way
for
we
example,
could call it.
you might be like, well, the U.S. throwing their lot in with the Allies ultimately was moral, but I don't think that you could say that necessarily the U.S. made that calculus on the basis of morality, if that makes sense.
All right, cool. Yeah, Prime. Then I'm good. I think we understand each other, and the disagreement is primarily semantic, and we could probably just fight it out on a philosophical nerd stream instead of boring everybody to death slowly. I'm sure that and I'm not saying that because I think it's boring. I could talk about this for another half hour, but I don't, and I'm sure Jack could too, but I don't want to hurt anybody else.
Oh, no, it's fine. I mean, this whole thing was philosophical, right? Ethical, moral dilemma. So, right. So I wanted to get everyone else because I had actually specifically Connor. Everything's reversed on my screen. I had actually specifically Connor about people who are armed and whether they have a right to, or not right, excuse me, duty to intervene. But what about the rest of you? Whether when the other person is armed, right? When the other person you're about to
Oh, I actually have a direct point for this, and I'll try to be brief. Basically, my thing is that this was something that Joe said too. So the luck factors of intervention and going up against variables that you can't control, and sometimes insurmountable odds that will likely result in your death. So, for instance, we've seen some school shooters be disarmed by unarmed teachers, faculty, staff, and even a student a few years ago, who literally charged the shooter before they began their rampage and disarmed them and pinned them down to the ground. Now, I'm not gonna, like, if somebody doesn't make that choice, if they say, like, I'm gonna run out the back building, I'm not gonna say you're a fucking piece of shit. But that person who did charge in and against insurmountable odds and against somebody with a lethal weapon did something that I view as morally laudable, I would want to kind of like gently encourage that culturally, while not mandating it.
But the officer in Parkland who decided not to intervene, I mean, even if he has a weapon, in that case, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to make it out alive, right? So
yeah, but he
I
he's
feel like in
signed
that
up for
situation.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's signed up to have this obligation, right? He's hey, I have this duty. I'm going to be the guy that does this shit. So when he doesn't do that shit that we expect him to do, that he's signed up voluntarily to do, I think we can,
But then
impugn
Wait,
him.
so are you just saying that you kind of want society to become more selfless?
I want society to be more selfless, but I also want people to be more assertive. I think oftentimes there's things that we view in our society that's like wrong, or that we don't view, and we don't even speak up because we want to leave everybody the freedom to make their own choices and decisions. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with saying, like, hey, based off of my worldview, what you just did is incredibly fucked up, and I would prefer it if you didn't fucking do that. And here's the action set that I value. I actually think that's incredibly important.
but
Connor,
you said,
I want you to be clear. Sorry, I want you to be clear is that, like, you're not trying to encourage people to grow a hero's complex.
No, but I want to increase people's capacity for it. So for instance, like I brought up multiple times that I would really like it if schools offered voluntary martial arts and self-defense classes. I would like it if people became aware of concepts like basic first aid and situational awareness. These are all incredibly valuable tools that I think the average person could benefit from, whether it's like first aid, self-defense, situational awareness, all that kind of stuff. And I wish as a society, while not saying like you need a hero's complex, you need to become like the Ubermensch, hey, if you can help.
but hold on.
Okay.
But you earlier said, like, going back to the Parkland thing, you earlier said that cops shouldn't be required to intervene. So
Oh, he did.
No.
What? He did say that.
No,
Yeah,
no.
but hold on. But I want to address it head on. I think the ruling that you're talking about, the duty to intervene, where courts have repeatedly found cops don't have a duty to intervene. I specifically think, and I'd be happy to be corrected on this, that this is a liability issue. The reason why they don't want to uphold in a court of law that cops have a specific duty to intervene is because it opens up like a civil liability, civil responsibility for them to be sued into oblivion. But on an individual level, Riverboat Jack kind of brought up like, hey, why don't we create a legal duty to intervene? Cops are required to take action in line with their training, their abilities, and good faith doctrine, which basically just means you try the best that you can. And if you have a duty to intervene, we will shield you from liability if you make a mistake, as long as you do your best.
But then do you agree with the cop being punished the way he was?
Oh, fuck yeah. Oh, fuck, dude,
he
I
said that
would
before.
want worse.
No,
yeah,
I know he said that before,
Yeah.
but hold on.
Yeah.
But he was punished.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying he shouldn't have been liable.
Okay,
I don't know
all right,
where I
so-
said
Am
that.
I missing?
so what
sorry, am I missing
Connor- what-
something? Okay.
Okay, well, I think what you're missing is that Connor is agreeing with the outcome in that particular case, but the implication of putting it onto text legally opens up a can of worms that is more of Pandora's box. Okay,
Yeah.
and so here's the
Prime,
thing.
You're not. Mhm.
No,
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead,
No,
buddy.
I think I
the
understood what he said.
negatives,
Go ahead,
the
Sean.
negatives of awesome. So I that's a pretty good argument.
Is it? But you're just saying
Yes.
there should be a special exceptions when we feel like it.
Who said
Yeah.
that?
That's what you just described. You're saying that.
Well, hold on.
Okay,
Prime,
all
let
right,
me-
all right. No,
can
no,
I-
no.
Can I
because
describe the
there's a
negative
difference between
externalities?
because the difference between legal liability and what is moral duty.
No. But he suffered actual real life consequences for his actions.
Yeah, okay. So, but I think his real life consequences were that he still received his retirement. He was fired from the police department, and he was blackballed by the Criminal Justice Training and Standards Commission or something like that. So basically, he can't get hired as a cop again. So I think he got blackballed. He was able to keep his retirement, and he was fired.
Okay, so that should have happened to all cops then who don't intervene.
All? Oh.
Well, no, but you're making a special exception here. Why are you making this exception?
There should no. There should okay. So if we find that somebody is negligent in their duties and they basically fail to perform, yeah. So this was Riverboat Jack's solution that I agree with, which is basically you have a legal duty to intervene, and then if you have a legal duty to intervene, here's these like added legalistic protections. So the reason why I'm saying like. The reason why I'm talking about those legalistic protections for duty to intervene specifically is because basically the example that I brought up where like somebody has a heart attack and you do 50 miles an hour instead of 65, and then they die 3 minutes after you show up on scene. If you argue that they have a duty to intervene, then you didn't intervene properly. That opens you up to civil suit. So that's what I'm talking about. That's the Pandora's box that is trying to be avoided by courts upholding that cops do not have a duty to intervene. But I think in American society, almost everybody agrees that cops do morally have a duty to intervene and should be expected to do so, and culturally should be expected to do so, and individually should be expected to do so. There's a difference.
Connor, I think in the legal sense, when you're talking about opening a certain Pandora's box, there is a reasonable expectation, or excuse me, there has to be an element of reasonableness that needs to be applied to those standards when we're talking about the legal obligations of a police officer, coming to somebody's aid. Like, for example, if they're trying to get to a scene as fast as they can and the guy dies of a heart attack, then reasonably speaking, that can't necessarily be on the cop because they tried everything they could to get there. So I don't necessarily agree that it would be opening a Pandora's box in that respect, but I do agree that in terms of a moral obligation, there needs to be at least some sort of responsibility for the police officer to not only keep an eye out for, things that are actually happening, but assist when they reasonably can. Because I think that's the line that we should straddle morally and legally. And I think those are the expectations that should be laid there.
Yeah, I think Riverboat Jack's solution does that elegantly. I think that's a really good solution. Is basically saying, yes, you have a duty to protect, but if you try your best, we'll shield you from basically like civil suit.
I kind of want to go back to this before that whole arc, which is I have an issue with hero complexes. Not like personally. I mean, like, I think there is an issue with hero complexes. And maybe Connor doesn't know about this, but when I think about a hero complex, I think most of the time it is devoid of any reasoning. I think there's very little thinking that goes into somebody who has a hero's complex. And because of that, people who say that they have a hero's complex will then put themselves in dangerous situations that will either make it worse for themselves, the other person, or everybody else. And so maybe like the more reasonable amendment, and maybe Connor doesn't even need to amend this, is that what we ought to try to encourage, or what I would want to try to encourage, is bravery that has thinking to it, that has a brain. And so that we make sure that we make the right choice. Now, whether or not you think about this through utilitarianism, or if you just like think it's a moral duty, well, if you think it's just a moral duty, you definitely should have to think about it. If not, then that's no different than a hero's complex.
Yeah, my issue with this is oftentimes we're talking about like psychology that even the people themselves don't fully understand. I volunteered to be a Marine in the wake of 9/11. Do I have a hero's complex? I was a person other than Grunt. I didn't serve in the infantry, so does that make me a coward? And these are questions that I asked myself, by the way. Same thing with like law enforcement, where basically like the job wears on you after a while. You see dead people, you see bad accidents, you get into bad fights. Maybe you see a few people get shot or killed. And then all you're doing at the end of the day, if you're trying to keep showing up to that job, is you're just trying to survive psychologically however you can. And unfortunately, just to share an anecdote, we actually got like psych training. It was like a PowerPoint thing where it was like, hey, here's the symptoms for anxiety and post-traumatic stress. Do you sleep well? Do you drink too much alcohol? Do you find yourself getting into fights with your loved ones sometimes? Do you take unnecessary risks? And basically what we're doing, like as they're reading off the symptoms for anxiety and post-traumatic stress, is we keep looking at every single officer in the room, because every single officer who is on the road and dealing with shitty stuff every single day has one of these symptoms at least. And that's kind of what I'm saying is like, I understand that we should like kind of like the Christian morality thing, where we should have like a higher morality that we strive to. I think that's cool. Thinking bravery. If you can come up with like a training course that would promote that, I think that's awesome. But I also think we have to work with the world we have and the psychology that's realistic for the role.
That is true. Just in that advocacy, also think about like this is one of my rules of thumb when it comes to administering first aid. Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, First Aid Merit Badge, things like that. Blah, blah,
Me too.
One of the rules is always check the area. But then why check the area? Check your surroundings. Okay, is to make sure. Well, one of the points is to make sure that you don't put yourself in danger as well, because one person, if there's a victim, one person is down and about, is probably won't be a functioning member of society without assistance. But if you also end up in that same position, then there are two people who are not potentially functioning members of society. And so then if somebody says that they have a snake bite, well, make sure that the snake isn't around so that you don't get bitten.
Okay, Connor, respond, but very quickly, very quickly. Okay?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. But basically, what I want to put to you is a realistic situation. My last day of field training, somebody was killed in front of me. And basically, I had to choose to charge into a crowd, rip people away from him as he was dying, and basically administer first aid without knowing exactly where the shooter was. Now, I thought there was a high probability that the shooter was in a car, but I didn't know that. The shooter was still potentially within the crowd. And so basically, like, I'm doing CPR while I'm wondering if somebody's going to walk up behind me and put a bullet in the back of my head while I'm doing it. And basically what I'm telling you is that there was not a single conscious thought that entire time. It was all training. It was all instinct. It was all lizard brain. And so while I think that like there were some things that I was thinking of, like, hey, what's the compression time? What's this? What's that? Like all that kind of stuff. There was like little flashes of conscious thought. But the conscious thought, if you were to put a ratio on it, it was maybe 10% conscious thought, 5% conscious thought, and 90% animal brain. And I'll leave it there.
Okay. Here's the difference.
We gotta move. Sorry, buddy.
Next week,
really fast.
Really quick.
Yeah, really quick. Okay, Connor, you're trained. I'm not. Okay, that was your job. It wasn't mine. I'm a private citizen. I'm a civilian. Okay, so then I think when we're talking about in the context of the topic, it's more about civilians than trained people.